In a small village, a cat named Whiskers discovered a magic fish in a pond. The fish promised 3 wishes in exchange for its freedom. Whiskers wished for endless fish, a cozy bed, and a bell that rang softly. The fish granted all 3 wishes, and swam away, leaving Whiskers content and purring in the sun. Chapter 1. Whispers in Jerusalem. The late afternoon sun cast a golden veil over Jerusalem, its ancient stones glowing with a warmth that seemed to hum with the weight of centuries. The air was thick with the scents of olive oil, dust, and blooming jasmine, mingling with the distant clatter of market stalls and the soft murmur of prayers from the old city. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his cream linen suit and polished shoes, sat at a small wrought iron table on the balcony of the King Solomon Hotel, a haven of elegance amidst the city's timeless chaos. His moustache, meticulously waxed, twitched slightly as he sipped at tisane, his grey eyes scanning the horizon where the Mount of Olives rose like a silent sentinel. Poirot had come to Jerusalem for respite, a rare pause in his relentless pursuit of truth through Europe's tangled mysteries. The Orient, he had hoped, would offer a tapestry of culture to soothe his restless mind. Yet, as he sat, his fingers drumming lightly on the table, he felt the familiar prickle of curiosity. The world he knew was never without its secrets, and even in this ancient city, human nature would weave its inevitable web of intrigue. The balcony overlooked a courtyard where hotel guests mingled, their voices a soft cacophony of English, French, and Arabic. Poirot's gaze drifted to a family seated at a table near a bubbling fountain, their tension palpable even from a distance. The Boyntons, as he had learned from the hotel register, were an American family, though their demeanor suggested a household, bound by something heavier than mere kinship. At the center sat Mrs. Boynton, a woman whose presence dominated like a storm cloud. Her broad frame, draped in a severe black dress, seemed to anchor the group, her eyes sharp and unyielding, surveying her companions with the intensity of a predator. Around her sat her children, or so Poirot presumed, 2 young men, a young woman with a nervous air, and a girl whose ethereal beauty was marred by a haunted expression. Poirot's attention sharpened as he observed their interactions. The elder son Lennox slouched in his chair, his face a mask of weary resignation, while his wife, Nadine, sat rigidly, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Raymond, the younger son, fidgeted with a napkin, his eyes darting toward his mother as if seeking permission to breathe. Carol, the young woman, picked at her food, her movements mechanical, while the youngest, Ginevra, stared into the distance, her delicate fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. There was no laughter, no warmth, only a suffocating silence, punctuated by Mrs. Boynton's occasional, clipped commands. "Raymond, sit up straight," Mrs. Boynton said, her voice low but cutting, like a blade slicing through velvet. "You look like a common laborer." Raymond flushed, his shoulders snapping upright. "Yes, mother," he murmured, his voice barely audible. Poirot's lips pursed. The dynamic was clear. Mrs. Boynton ruled with an iron will, her children bound to her not by affection but by some unspoken chain. He leaned back, his fingers steepled, considering the psychology at play. A family so constrained, he mused, was a tinderbox awaiting a spark, as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Poirot's reverie was interrupted by a breeze carrying a fragment of conversation from an open window above. The words were faint but unmistakable, delivered in a low, urgent tone. "You see, don't you, that she's got to be killed?" Poirot froze, his tisane halfway to his lips. The voice was male, strained with emotion, but the speaker was impossible to identify from his vantage point. He set the cup down with deliberate care, his mind racing. The words were not idle. They carried the weight of intent, a confession of conspiracy that could not be ignored. He glanced at the Boyntons, wondering if the speaker was among them, but their table remained a tableau of strained silence. The courtyard began to empty as guests retired for the evening, but Poirot remained, his curiosity now fully ignited. He signaled to a waiter, a young man with a quick smile and a tray balanced expertly on one hand. "Monsieur Poirot," said, his French accent softening the edges of his words. "The family at the table by the fountain, do you know them?" The waiter glanced over, his smile fading slightly. "The Boyntons, sir. Americans. They'd been here a week. Not the friendliest lot, if you'll pardon me saying." "Indeed." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "And the lady in black shy is the matriarch?" "Oh yes, sir. Mrs. Boynton rules the roost. She does. Her children don't say a word, unless she allows it. Gives me the creeps, to be honest. Poirot nodded, slipping the waiter a coin. Mercy, you have been most helpful. As the waiter retreated, Poirot's gaze returned to the Boyntons, who were now rising from their table. Mrs. Boynton moved slowly, her bulk supported by a cane, yet her presence seemed to command the air itself. The family trailed behind her, their movements synchronized, as if tethered by invisible strings. Ginevra, the youngest, lingered at the rear, her eyes catching Poirot's for a fleeting moment. There was something in her gaze, fear, perhaps, or a plea that sent a shiver through him. He rose, adjusting his hat, and made his way to the hotel lobby, where the evening bustle was in full swing. The concierge, a portly man with a penchant for gossip, was polishing the counter when Poirot approached. "Bonsoir, Monsieur Poirot," said, his tone genial. "A question, if I may. The Boynton family they're well known here." The concierge's eyes gleamed with interest. "Well, Monsieur Poirot, they're not exactly social butterflies. Mrs. Boynton, she's a widow, they say, and wealthy, used to be a prison warden back in the States, if you can believe it. Keeps her family on a tight leash. The staff talk, say she's got a temper that could curdle milk. And her children," Poirot pressed, his voice light but probing. "Odd bunch. Lennox, the eldest, is married to Nadine, but you'd think they were strangers. Raymond and Carol, they're like shadows, always looking to their mother for approval. And Ginevra, the youngest, she's got a look about her, like she's half in a dream. Some say she's not quite right in the head." Poirot's smile was polite, but his mind was cataloguing every detail. A prison warden, he thought. A woman accustomed to control, to bending others to her will. Such a personality could inspire resentment, even hatred. And those words, "she's got to be killed," echoed in his mind. A dark promise that demanded investigation. He thanked the concierge and ascended to his room, a suite adorned with tapestries and heavy drapes that muffled the city's hum. From his balcony, he could still see the courtyard, now empty, save for a lone figure, Ginevra Boynton, standing by the fountain, her silhouette fragile against the moonlight. She was motionless, her head tilted as if listening to some distant call. Poirot watched, his instincts whispering that she held a key to the family's secrets, whether she knew it or not. The next morning, Poirot joined a group of hotel guests for breakfast in the dining room, a grand space with arched windows and mosaic floors. The Boyntons were absent, but the room buzzed with chatter, much of it centered on a forthcoming tour to Petra, the ancient Nabatean city carved into rose-red cliffs. Poirot's interest was piqued when he overheard a young woman, Sarah King, discussing the trip with a fellow guest, Dr. Theodore Gerard, a French psychiatrist with a penchant for studying human behavior. "Petra's a marvel," Sarah was saying, her voice bright with enthusiasm. "But I'm more curious about the people on this tour. That Boynton family, for instance, they're like something out of a Gothic novel." Dr. Gerard chuckled, his eyes crinkling. "You've noticed, Mademoiselle King. Mrs. Boynton is a fascinating study in domination. Her children are not free agents, they are extensions of her will. It is a case for my notebook, I think." Poirot, seated nearby, leaned forward slightly, pretending to study his newspaper. Sarah King, he noted, was a spirited young doctor, her dark hair and quick wit a contrast to the Boyntons' due restraint. Dr. Gerard, with his scholarly air, seemed an astute observer, a potential ally in unraveling the mystery. As breakfast concluded, Poirot approached their table, his manner charmingly deferential. "Pardon, mademoiselle, monsieur," he said, bowing slightly. "I could not help but overhear your mention of Petra. I, Hercule Poirot, am considering the tour myself. Might I join your conversation?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Hercule Poirot, the detective. I've read about you. Of course, please join us." Dr. Gerard extended a hand, his expression curious. "A pleasure, Monsieur Poirot. Your reputation precedes you. Are you here on business or pleasure?" "Pleasure, I assure you," Poirot said, settling into a chair. "Though I confess, the human drama is never far from my attention. This Boynton family, for instance, they intrigue you, Nan?" Sarah nodded, her voice dropping. "They're unsettling. Mrs. Boynton watches her children like a hawk, and they barely speak unless she prompts them. I saw Raymond yesterday, trying to read a book, and she snatched it away, saying it was frivolous. It's cruel." "Cruelty, mademoiselle, takes many forms," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing, "and sometimes it breeds rebellion." Dr. Gerard leaned forward, his tone academic. Mrs. Boynton exhibits traits of a pathological controller. Her children are not merely obedient, they are suppressed. Such dynamics can lead to extreme outcomes. Poirot's mind flashed to the overheard words. Extreme outcomes. Indeed, he steered the conversation to the Petra tour. Learning that the Boyntons had booked it, along with Sarah, Dr. Gerard, and a few others, including an Englishwoman named Lady Westholm, whose booming voice had already irritated half the hotel. As they spoke, the Boyntons entered the dining room, their arrival silencing nearby conversations. Mrs. Boynton's cane tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm on the floor, her children trailing behind like a somber procession. Poirot watched as they took a table in the corner, Mrs. Boynton's eyes scanning the room before settling on Sarah, who met her gaze with defiance. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, his fingers brushing his moustache. "There is a storm brewing in that family, and I fear it will break soon." The day unfolded with Poirot exploring Jerusalem's winding streets, his mind never far from the Boyntons. He visited the Wailing Wall, where the air thrummed with devotion, and wandered through the souk, where vendors hawked spices and silks. Yet, everywhere he went, he saw echoes of the family's tension. A mother scolding her child, a man glancing nervously at his companion. Human nature, he thought, was a universal language, and the Boyntons spoke it in tones of despair. That evening, Poirot returned to the hotel, his thoughts coalescing around the overheard remark. He dined alone, choosing a table near the Boyntons to observe them further. The meal was a study in repression. Lennox barely spoke. Nadine's smile was strained, and Raymond's hands trembled as he cut his food. Carol's eyes darted to her mother, seeking approval for every bite, while Ginevra seemed lost in her own world. Her fork untouched. Mrs. Boynton's voice broke the silence. "Ginevra, stop dreaming. Eat your supper." Ginevra flinched, her voice soft but clear. "I'm not hungry, mother, not hungry." Mrs. Boynton's tone was icy. "You'll eat what's put before you, or you'll regret it." The table fell silent, the other guests pretending not to notice. Poirot, however, noted every detail. The flush on Ginevra's cheeks, the way Nadine's hand tightened on her glass, the flicker of defiance in Raymond's eyes before he looked away. It was a microcosm of control, and Poirot felt a chill at the thought of what such control might provoke. After dinner, he lingered in the lounge, a glass of cognac in hand, when Sarah King approached, her expression troubled. "Monsieur," she said, sitting across from him, "I saw something odd today. I was walking near the Boynton suite, and I heard raised voices, Mrs. Boynton and someone else. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded angry." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Angry, you say? And did you see who it was?" Sarah shook her head. "The door was closed, and I didn't want to eavesdrop. But it's not the first time. Yesterday, I saw Carol slip out of their suite, looking like she'd been crying." "Most interesting," Poirot said, his mind racing. "Mademoiselle, you have the instincts of a detective. Tell me, are you joining the Petra tour?" "Yes," Sarah said, her voice firm. "And I'm keeping an eye on that family. Something's not right." Poirot nodded, his thoughts aligning. The Petra tour would bring the Boyntons into a new setting, where their tensions might surface more clearly. He resolved to join the tour, not as a tourist, but as an observer of the human heart, where he knew the darkest secrets lay hidden. The evening drew to a close. Poirot stood once more on his balcony, the city's lights twinkling below. The words he had overheard, "She's got to be killed," replayed in his mind, each syllable a challenge to his little grey cells. He thought of Mrs. Boynton's iron grip, her children's stifled spirits, and the possibility that one of them or someone else had reached a breaking point. He turned back to his room, his decision made. Tomorrow, he would join the Petra tour, not for the ancient ruins, but for the living drama unfolding before him. The Boyntons, he sensed, were a family on the edge, and he, Hercule Poirot, would uncover the truth before the storm broke. Chapter 2. The shadow of control. The air in Jerusalem shimmered with the weight of history, its ancient stones soaking up the sun's relentless heat. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed, despite the sweltering morning, stood on the balcony of the King Solomon Hotel, his sharp eyes scanning the bustling street below. The city pulsed with life, merchants calling out their wares, tourists weaving through narrow alleys, and the distant hum of prayer from sacred sites. Yet, Poirot's mind was not on the vibrant chaos of Jerusalem, but on the chilling words he had overheard the previous night, drifting through his open window like a venomous whisper. "You see, don't you, that she's got to be killed?" The voice had been low, urgent, and unmistakably deliberate. It had stirred Poirot's insatiable curiosity, that peculiar itch that only a puzzle of human nature could provoke. At dinner, his keen observation had zeroed in on the Boynton family, a group so tightly wound under the iron grip of their matriarch, Mrs. Boynton, that their every gesture seemed choreographed by fear. Mrs. Boynton, a former prison warden with a face like weathered granite, ruled her adult children Lennox, Nadine, Raymond, Carol, and Ginevra with a cruelty that fascinated Poirot. It was not physical but psychological, a suffocating dominance that left her children pale and subdued, their eyes darting nervously as if expecting a lash. The youngest, Ginevra, had caught his attention most of all, a fragile, theatrical girl, whose nervous glances suggested secrets she dared not voice. Now, as Poirot sipped his morning tisane, his thoughts were interrupted by the clatter of a tour bus pulling up to the hotel. The vehicle was a dusty relic, its faded paint barely concealing the dents of countless journeys. A group of travelers spilled out, their voices a mix of excitement and exhaustion. Among them were the Boyntons, their expressions a stark contrast to the lively chatter of the others. Mrs. Boynton, seated in a wheelchair pushed by a sullen Lennox, exuded an aura of command, her heavy-lidded eyes scanning her family like a predator assessing its prey. Poirot noted the way her children flanked her, not out of affection but obligation, their postures rigid as if braced for an invisible storm. The tour guide, a wiry man named Mr. Hassan, with a perpetually harried expression, clapped his hands. "For attention, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our grand adventure to Petra. The rose-red city awaits, a marvel carved from the desert itself. We depart in 1 hour, please. Gather your belongings and prepare for a journey into history." Poirot, who had impulsively joined the tour after last night's unsettling eavesdropping, adjusted his straw hat and descended to the lobby. There, he encountered Sarah King, a young Englishwoman whose spirited demeanor stood in sharp contrast to the Boyntons' gloom. Sarah, a medical student with a keen intellect and an air of defiance, had caught Poirot's eye at dinner when she dared to meet Mrs. Boynton's gaze without flinching. Now, she stood by the lobby's arched window, her dark hair catching the sunlight as she studied a guidebook. "Mademoiselle King," Poirot greeted, his voice smooth as polished marble. "You are eager for this journey to Petra, Nan?" Sarah looked up, her green eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, absolutely. Petra's been on my list forever. Those tombs, the sick, the sheer audacity of carving a city from rock. And you, I didn't peg you for a desert adventurer." Poirot smiled, his mustache twitching. "The desert, mademoiselle, holds many secrets, not all of them carved in stone. I find human nature to be the most fascinating ruin of all." Sarah raised an eyebrow, sensing the weight behind his words. "You're watching the Boyntons, aren't you? I saw you at dinner. That family, they're like prisoners, aren't they? Mrs. Boynton's got them all under her thumb." "An astute observation," Poirot said, inclining his head. "And you, I notice, are not so easily cowed by her, a rare quality." Sarah shrugged, but her expression darkened. "She's a tyrant. I've seen her kind before, people who thrive on control, who feed off others' fear. It's disgusting. I feel sorry for her children, especially Raymond. He's got this spark, you know, but it's like she's smothering it." Poirot filed away her mention of Raymond, the second eldest Boynton son, whose quiet intensity had stood out at dinner. "A spark, you say? Perhaps one that could ignite rebellion?" Sarah hesitated, then grinned. "You're fishing, Mr. Poirot, but I'll bite. Raymond's sweet, but he's trapped. They all are. I don't know how they stand it." Before Poirot could probe further, the tour group began to assemble. Alongside the Boyntons were other travelers: Dr. Theodore Gerard, a French psychiatrist with a scholarly air and a notebook always in hand; Lady Westholm, a formidable Englishwoman whose booming voice and imperious manner dominated any room; and Mr. Cope, an American archaeologist with a nervous habit of adjusting his glasses. Poirot noted their interactions, particularly the way Dr. Gerard observed the Boyntons with clinical interest, his pen scribbling notes whenever Mrs. Boynton spoke. The bus ride to Petra was a 4-hour journey through the arid expanse of the Jordanian desert. The landscape was stark yet mesmerizing. a sea of golden sand punctuated by jagged outcrops and the occasional Bedouin encampment. Inside the bus, the atmosphere was stifling, not just from the heat, but from the tension radiating from the Boynton family. Mrs. Boynton sat at the front, her wheelchair secured, her eyes half closed but missing nothing. Her children were scattered throughout the bus, each seemingly intent on avoiding her gaze. Poirot, seated near the back, watched as Sarah struck up a conversation with Raymond. The young man's face lit up at her approach, a rare smile breaking through his usual reserve. Their exchange was quiet, but Poirot caught fragments Sarah's teasing remark about the desert's beauty, Raymond's hesitant agreement, and a shared laugh that drew a sharp glance from Mrs. Boynton. The matriarch's lips tightened, and she beckoned Raymond with a single, imperious gesture. He obeyed instantly, his smile fading as he moved to her side. "Raymond." Mrs. Boynton's voice was low, almost a hiss. "You will not embarrass me with that girl. Do you understand?" "Yes, mother," Raymond mumbled, his shoulders slumping. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The exchange was brief but telling, a microcosm of the family's dynamic. Mrs. Boynton's control was absolute, her words a leash that yanked her children back into submission. As the bus rumbled on, Poirot struck up a conversation with Dr. Gerard, who sat across the aisle, his notebook open to a page filled with dense handwriting. "Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot began, "you study the human mind. Oui. What do you make of our fellow travelers, particularly the Boyntons?" Gerard's eyes gleamed with intellectual curiosity. "A fascinating case, Mr. Poirot. Mrs. Boynton is a textbook example of pathological domination. Her children are not merely obedient, they are subjugated. It's as if their wills have been eroded, replaced by her own. I'm studying her methods for a paper on psychological control." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. "And do you believe such control could provoke extreme reactions?" Gerard's expression grew grave. "Oh, absolutely. Repression breeds resentment, and resentment can fester into something dangerous. If one of her children were to snap..." He trailed off, his gaze drifting to the Boyntons. "Let's just say I wouldn't be surprised." The bus lurched to a stop at a rest point, a dusty oasis with a single palm tree and a ramshackle cafe. The group disembarked, stretching their legs and seeking shade. Poirot lingered near the Boyntons, observing as Mrs. Boynton issued orders. Lennox was to fetch her water, Nadine to adjust her shawl, Carol to stay within sight. Ginevra, however, hovered at the edge of the group, her delicate frame trembling. As she stared into the distance, Poirot approached her, his tone gentle. "Mademoiselle Ginevra, you seem troubled. The dessert, it is overwhelming, Nan." Ginevra started, her wide eyes meeting his. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, it's not the desert, it's her. She's always watching, always knowing. I can't breathe sometimes." Her voice was a whisper, tinged with desperation. Poirot's heart stirred with pity, but his mind remained sharp. "And yet, you are here, in this vast place. Perhaps the desert offers possibilities." Ginevra's lips parted, as if to say more, but a sharp call from Mrs. Boynton cut her off. "Ginevra, come here at once." The girl flinched and hurried back, leaving Poirot to ponder her words. Possibilities, rebellion, or something darker. The group reboarded the bus, but the tension had thickened, palpable as the desert heat. Sarah, now seated near Poirot, leaned over and whispered, "Did you see that? She's like a spider, pulling them all into her web. I swear, if I were Raymond, I'd run as far as I could." "Running, mademoiselle, requires courage," Poirot replied softly, "and courage is often crushed before it can grow." Sarah frowned, her gaze flicking to Raymond, who sat hunched beside his mother. "He deserves better. They all do." The final leg of the journey brought them to the edge of Petra's territory, where the desert gave way to towering cliffs that glowed crimson in the fading light. The group disembarked at a makeshift camp, a cluster of tents pitched near the entrance to the sick, the narrow canyon leading to Petra's heart. Mr. Hassan bustled about, assigning tents and outlining the next day's itinerary. Poirot, however, was distracted by a small but significant detail: Mrs. Boynton's handbag, which she clutched tightly as Lennox wheeled her to a tent. As she adjusted her shawl, the bag slipped slightly, revealing a glint of metal, a syringe, its needle catching the lantern light. Poirot's pulse quickened. A syringe in a handbag was not inherently sinister, but in the context of that overheard remark, it was a thread worth pulling. He made a mental note to investigate further, his mind already weaving a tapestry of motives and opportunities. Dinner was served under a canopy. The group gathered around a long table laden with flatbread, hummus, and grilled meats. The setting was idyllic, the stars emerging in a velvet sky, but the atmosphere was anything but serene. Mrs. Boynton presided over her family like a queen, her voice cutting through the chatter whenever one of her children dared to speak out of turn. Poirot watched as she humiliated Raymond for a second time that day, her words dripping with venom. "Raymond, sit up straight. You look like a slouching schoolboy. Do you want everyone to think I raised a fool?" Raymond's face reddened, and he muttered an apology, his eyes fixed on his plate. Sarah, seated across from him, clenched her fork, her knuckles white. Poirot caught her eye and gave a slight shake of his head, urging restraint. She exhaled sharply but said nothing, though her gaze burned with defiance as the meal progressed. Poirot engaged Lady Westholme in conversation, probing her opinions on the Boyntons. "A dreadful woman," Lady Westholme declared, her voice booming. "No discipline, no class. Her children are spineless, and she's to blame. I'd have them whipped into shape in no time." Poirot smiled politely, noting her disdain. "And yet, Lady Westholme, discipline can take many forms." Mrs. Boynton's methods seemed effective, in their way. "Effective?" Lady Westholme snorted. "She's a bully, plain and simple. I've seen her type in Parliament, petty tyrants who mistake cruelty for strength." Poirot filed away her words, sensing a personal animosity that might prove relevant. He turned his attention to Mr. Cope, the archaeologist, who was fidgeting with his glasses and muttering about Petra's Nabatean history. "A remarkable place, Mr. Cope," Poirot said. "But perhaps you have observed more than just ruins." Cope blinked, startled. "Oh, well, I suppose. The Boyntons are rather odd, aren't they? I mean, the way she controls them. It's like something out of a Greek tragedy." "Indeed," Poirot murmured, his mind racing. "A tragedy, yes, but one poised to unfold in the desert's crimson embrace." As the group dispersed to their tents, Poirot lingered, his eyes on Mrs. Boynton's retreating figure. The syringe, the overheard remark, the family's palpable fear, it all pointed to a storm brewing beneath the surface. He retired to his tent, his notebook open, and began to sketch a diagram of the Boyntons' relationships, each line a thread of motive, each name a potential suspect. The desert night was silent, but Poirot's mind was alive with possibilities, the puzzle of human nature unfolding before him like the stars above. He closed his notebook with a satisfied nod, certain of one thing: Mrs. Boynton's control was a shadow cast over her family, but shadows could hide dangerous intentions. Tomorrow, in Petra's ancient heart, he would begin to pull those intentions into the light. Chapter 3. Petra's red embrace. The caravan of dust-covered vehicles wound through the desert like a sluggish serpent, each turn kicking up clouds of ochre sand that shimmered in the relentless Jordanian sun. Hercule Poirot, seated in the back of a rattling jeep, adjusted his straw hat to shield his eyes from the glare. The air was thick with heat, carrying the faint tang of ancient stone and the promise of mystery. Ahead, the crimson cliffs of Petra loomed, their jagged silhouettes slicing into the azure sky like the jagged teeth of some primordial beast. The ancient city, carved into the heart of the desert, was a monument to human ambition and endurance. But for Poirot, it was a stage where the Boynton family's simmering drama would unfold under his watchful gaze. He glanced at his fellow travelers, a motley assembly of tourists and the troubled Boynton clan, whose strained silences and furtive glances had already piqued his curiosity. Mrs. Boynton, the matriarch, sat in the lead vehicle, her bulky frame swathed in black, her presence as oppressive as the midday heat. Her stepchildren Lennox, Nadine, Raymond, Carol, and Ginevra were scattered among the jeeps, their faces a gallery of suppressed emotions. Sarah King, the spirited young doctor who had caught Poirot's attention at the King Solomon Hotel, sat beside him, her eyes bright with a mix of excitement and unease. Dr. Theodore Gerard, the French psychiatrist with a penchant for studying domination, scribbled notes in a leather-bound journal, his brow furrowed in thought. And then there was Lady Westholme, the imperious British aristocrat, whose booming voice carried over the rumble of engines, lecturing anyone within earshot about the historical significance of Petra. Poirot's mustache twitched as he leaned towards Sarah. "Mademoiselle, you find this landscape inspiring, Nan?" the rose-red city, half as old as time, as the poet says. Yet I sense it holds secrets beyond its ancient stones." Sarah smiled, her dark hair catching the sunlight as she turned to him. "It's breathtaking, Monsieur Poirot, but it's the people here who intrigue me more than the ruins. There's something off about the Boyntons, don't you feel it?" "Mais oui," Poirot replied, his voice low, his eyes gleaming with interest. The air around them crackles with tension, like a storm waiting to break. "I have observed their interactions, and I assure you, mademoiselle, there is a story beneath their silence, a story I intend to uncover." The convoy halted at the entrance to the sick, the narrow canyon that served as Petra's gateway. The group disembarked, stretching their legs and shielding their eyes against the sun. The cliffs towered above, their surfaces sculpted by time into swirling patterns of red, pink, and gold. The air was cooler here, the shadows deep and inviting. Poirot adjusted his tie, a small act of defiance against the desert's informality, and watched as the Boyntons gathered around their mother. Mrs. Boynton, her face a mask of smug authority, issued curt orders to her children, who moved with the mechanical obedience of marionettes. "Raymond, don't slouch," she snapped, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the group. "Carol, stop fidgeting. You're embarrassing me." Raymond, a handsome young man with haunted eyes, straightened reluctantly, while Carol, her delicate features pinched with resentment, clasped her hands tightly. Lennox and Nadine, the married couple, stood apart, their faces unreadable. Jean, the youngest, hovered at the edge of the group, her auburn hair catching the light as she gazed at the cliffs with a dreamy intensity, as if seeking escape in their vastness. Poirot's attention shifted to Sarah, who was watching the scene with a physician's keen eye. "They're like prisoners," she whispered to him. "She controls every move they make. It's unnatural." "Indeed," Poirot murmured. "Control is a powerful weapon, mademoiselle, but it breeds rebellion. The heart, it does not bend forever." Their guide, a wiry Bedouin named Khalid, clapped his hands for attention. "Welcome to Petra, the city of the Nabateans," he announced, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "We will walk through the sick to the treasury, then explore the royal tombs and the amphitheater. Stay close, and beware the uneven ground." As the group began the trek through the sick, Poirot fell into step beside Dr. Gerard, whose thoughtful demeanor suggested a mind as analytical as his own. "Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot began, "you study the psychology of domination. I suspect you find the Boynton family a most fascinating case." Gerard's lips curved into a wry smile. "You're perceptive, Monsieur Poirot. Mrs. Boynton is a textbook example of a tyrant. Her control is not merely physical, but psychological. She wields fear like a whip, and her children are her captives. I've rarely seen a family so thoroughly under one person's thrall. And yet," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing, "such control invites defiance. Do you not agree that one among them might harbor the courage or the desperation to break free?" Gerard hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the Boynton. "Perhaps, but breaking free from a figure like Mrs. Boynton would require an extraordinary act. Her power is rooted in their minds, not just their circumstances. It's a prison they carry within them." Poirot nodded, filing away the insight. The six walls closed in around them, the path narrowing until the group walked single file, their footsteps muffled by centuries of dust. The air grew cooler, the light dimmer, as the canyon's embrace enveloped them. Poirot's mind buzzed with possibilities, his instincts whispering that the Boyntons' drama was approaching a crescendo. Halfway through the sick, the group paused at a carved niche where an ancient Nabatean idol stood, its features worn smooth by time. Mrs. Boynton, seated on a portable chair carried by a porter, surveyed the group with a predatory gaze. She called sharply, "Stop dawdling, you're holding everyone up." Ginevra, who had been tracing the idol's contours with a delicate finger, flinched and hurried to her mother's side. Poirot noted the exchange, his mind cataloguing the matriarch's relentless need to dominate even the smallest moments. Sarah, walking beside Raymond, leaned close to him, her voice soft but audible to Poirot's keen ears. "Raymond, you don't have to let her treat you like this," she said. "You're stronger than you think." Raymond's jaw tightened, his eyes darting toward his mother. "You don't understand, Sarah. She sees everything, knows everything." Sarah's expression softened, but her voice held a steely edge. "No one is omniscient, Raymond, not even her." Mrs. Boynton's head snapped toward them, her eyes narrowing. "Raymond, come here," she commanded. He obeyed instantly, leaving Sarah to clench her fists in frustration. Poirot, observing from a few paces back, noted the spark of defiance in Sarah's posture. She was a wild card. He decided a force that might disrupt the matriarch's carefully constructed empire. The group emerged from the sick into the breathtaking expanse of the treasury, its rose-red facade glowing in the sunlight. The tourists gasped, cameras clicking as they captured the intricate columns and pediments carved into the cliff. Poirot, however, was more interested in the human drama unfolding before him. The Boyntons stood apart from the others, their isolation palpable. Mrs. Boynton, enthroned in her chair, surveyed the scene with a faint smirk, as if the ancient city were merely another stage for her authority. Khalid led them onward, past the treasury to the street of facades, where rows of tombs gaped like open mouths in the rock. The group spread out, some climbing to explore the higher ledges, others lingering to sketch or photograph. Poirot seized the opportunity to approach Carol, who stood alone near a crumbling tomb, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. "Mademoiselle Carol," he said gently, "you seem lost in thought. May I intrude for a moment?" Carol started, her pale eyes meeting his with a flicker of suspicion. "I'm fine, Monsieur Poirot, just taking it all in." "Of course," he said, his tone soothing. "Petra is a place of wonders, yet it also mirrors the heart's secrets. Nan, I sense you carry a burden, perhaps one you wish to share." Her lips parted, then closed, as if wrestling with a confession. "You don't know what it's like," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Living under her shadow, every day, it's like being buried alive." Poirot's expression remained neutral, but his mind raced. A powerful image. "Mademoiselle, to be buried alive is too long for freedom, is it not? And sometimes, freedom requires a bold step." Carol's eyes widened, a flash of something, fear perhaps, or resolve crossing her face. Before she could respond, Nadine approached, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to her sister-in-law's tension. "Carol, Mother wants you," she said, her tone neutral but firm. Carol nodded and hurried away, leaving Poirot to study Nadine. "Madame Boynton," he said, "you are the anchor of this family. I think yet even anchors can strain against the chain." Nadine's smile was tight, her eyes guarded. "You're observant, Monsieur Poirot, but some chains are stronger than they seem." As she walked away, Poirot's gaze lingered on her retreating figure. There was a quiet strength in Nadine, a resilience that intrigued him. Was she a victim, like the others, or something more? His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near the royal tombs, where Lady Westholme was berating Khalid for some perceived slight. "Utter incompetence," she barked, her voice echoing off the cliffs. "You call this a guided tour? I could write a better itinerary blindfolded." Khalid, unfazed, offered a placating smile. "My lady, Petra reveals its secrets to those who listen, not those who shout." Poirot suppressed a chuckle, admiring the guide's deft handling of the aristocrat. He made a mental note to speak with Lady Westholme later. Her bluster might conceal a sharper mind than she let on. As the day wore on, the group settled for a midday meal in a shaded encampment near the amphitheatre. The Boyntons sat apart, their conversation stilted under Mrs. Boynton's watchful eye. Poirot, seated with Sarah and Dr. Gerard, took the opportunity to probe further. "Doctor," he said, slicing into a piece of flatbread, "you spoke of Mrs. Boynton's psychological tyranny. Have you observed any signs of rebellion among her children? A spark, perhaps, that might ignite." Gerard chewed thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the Boyntons. "Rebellion is inevitable in such dynamics, but it's often suppressed. Ginevra, for instance, she's theatrical, prone to dramatic outbursts. But Carol, there's a quiet intensity there. She's the one to watch." Sarah leaned forward, her voice low. "I think Raymond's the key. He's torn between fear and longing. If anyone's going to break free, it's him." With a push, Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A push, mademoiselle. From you, perhaps." Sarah flushed, but held his gaze. "Maybe. He deserves better than this prison." Their conversation was cut short by a sudden cry from Ginevra, who had wandered to the edge of the camp. She stood before a carved tomb, her hands pressed to her cheeks, her voice rising in a theatrical wail. "It's too much. The weight of it all. The eyes in the stone, they see everything." Mrs. Boynton's chair creaked as she turned, her voice icy. "Ginevra, stop this nonsense at once. You're making a spectacle." But Ginevra, caught in her own drama, ignored her mother, her words tumbling out in a rush. The cliff's no mother. They've seen blood before, and they'll see it again. The group fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Poirot's pulse quickened, his mind seizing on the phrase, "they'll see it again." Was it merely theatrical flair, or something more? He resolved to keep a closer eye on Ginevra, whose erratic behavior might mask a deeper truth. As the meal concluded, the group dispersed to explore further. Poirot lingered near the Boyntons, his ears attuned to their hushed conversations. He overheard Lennox speaking to Nadine in low tones, their words barely audible over the rustle of the desert wind. "We can't keep living like this," Lennox said, his voice strained. "Something has to change." Nadine's reply was soft, but firm. "Be patient. Lennox will find a way." Poirot's mustache twitched. A way, indeed. But what way? Escape, rebellion, or something darker? He made a mental note to probe Lennox's detachment further. The man's quiet resignation might conceal a simmering resolve. The afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the valley. The group reconvened at the amphitheatre, where Khalid recounted tales of Nabatean rituals and Roman spectacles. Poirot, however, was distracted, his mind piecing together the fragments of the day's observations. The Boyntons were a puzzle, each sibling a piece that didn't quite fit. Mrs. Boynton's control was absolute, yet cracks were forming Carol's quiet rebellion, Raymond's conflicted heart, Ginevra's theatrical outbursts, and Nadine's enigmatic strength. As the group prepared to return to the camp for the night, Poirot paused at the edge of the amphitheatre, his eyes sweeping the crimson cliffs. The setting sun bathed the valley in a blood-red glow, the ancient stones whispering of secrets long buried. He drew a small notebook from his pocket and began sketching a list of motives, his pen moving with deliberate precision. For each point, he noted a reason to resent their mother: freedom, love, inheritance, survival. Beside Sarah's name, he wrote catalyst, and beside Dr. Gerard's observer, Lady Westholme earned a question mark. Her motives unclear, but her presence too forceful to ignore. Satisfied that he had identified the fissures in the Boynton family's loyalty, Poirot closed his notebook and turned toward the camp. The desert air was cooling, the stars beginning to prick the indigo sky. Petra's red embrace held them all, a crucible for the drama that was surely coming. As he walked, Poirot's mind hummed with anticipation, the little grey cells dancing with the thrill of the chase. The stage was set, the players in place. Now, it was only a matter of time before the curtain rose on the truth. Chapter 4. The puncture of doubt. The sun hung low over Petra, casting long jagged shadows across the crimson cliffs that cradled the ancient city. The air was thick with the scent of dust and heat, the kind that clung to the skin and made every breath feel like a labor. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the encampment, his polished shoes incongruous against the rocky terrain, his mustache twitching as he surveyed the scene. The tour group, a motley assembly of weary travelers, had gathered near the mouth of a narrow canyon, their voices a low hum of shock and speculation. At the center of their attention lay Mrs. Boynton, her corpulent form slumped in a canvas chair, her eyes staring blankly at the sky. She was dead. Poirot's keen gaze swept over the body, noting the unnatural stillness, the faint sheen of sweat on her brow, and, most crucially, the tiny puncture mark on her wrist, a detail so subtle it might have been overlooked by a less discerning eye. The camp doctor, a nervous man named Dr. Carver, had declared it heart failure, citing Mrs. Boynton's age and apparent ill health. But Poirot, with his unerring instinct for the irregular, knew better. This was no natural death. This was murder. The desert wind stirred, rustling the tents and carrying faint whispers of unease among the group. Poirot adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the glare, and turned to Dr. Theodore Gerard, who stood nearby, his brow furrowed in thought. "Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot said, his voice smooth but laced with urgency. "You are a man of science, Nan. What do you make of this anomaly on Madame Boynton's wrist?" Gerard, a tall, gaunt Frenchman with a penchant for studying the human psyche, crouched beside the body, his fingers hovering over the puncture mark without touching it. "It is curious," he murmured, his accent clipped. "A needle, perhaps, but so small it would require precision and a substance potent enough to kill swiftly." "Precisement," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "And yet, the good Dr. Carver insists it is the heart. A convenient diagnosis, would you not agree, for one who wishes to avoid questions?" Gerard straightened, his expression grim. "You suspect foul play, Monsieur Poirot." "I do not suspect, Monsieur. I know." Poirot's tone was firm, his confidence unshakable. He gestured toward the encampment, where the Boynton family stood in a tight knot, their faces a mix of shock, relief, and something darker, guilt, perhaps. "We must act quickly. The authorities will arrive by tomorrow, and I intend to have answers before they muddy the waters. Come, let us secure the scene." Together, they moved Mrs. Boynton's body to a shaded tent, ensuring it remained undisturbed. Poirot instructed the camp staff to cordon off the area, his authority unquestioned despite his lack of official standing. The tour group watched, some with curiosity, others with unease, as Poirot began his work. His mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments of what he had observed over the past days, the Boynton's strained dynamics, the overheard remark in Jerusalem, the syringe in Mrs. Boynton's bag. This was no random act. This was a calculated strike, born of motive and opportunity. The encampment buzzed with activity as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the cliffs in hues of blood and gold. Poirot gathered the tour group near the central fire, its flames casting flickering shadows on their faces. The Boynton siblings Lennox, Nadine, Raymond, Carol, and Genevrist, apart from the others, their expressions guarded. Sarah King, the young doctor who had challenged Mrs. Boynton's authority, hovered nearby, her eyes darting between Raymond and Poirot. Lady Westholme, a formidable British aristocrat with a penchant for lecturing, stood with her arms crossed, her disapproval palpable. The other tourists, Mr. Cope, a mild-mannered American, and Miss Pierce, a fluttery schoolteacher, whispered nervously among themselves. Poirot raised a hand for silence, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice carrying over the crackle of the fire, "we are faced with a tragedy. Madame Boynton is dead, and I regret to inform you that her death was not natural. A puncture mark on her wrist suggests poison, administered with intent. Until the authorities arrive, I, Hercule Poirot, will investigate this matter. I ask for your cooperation." A murmur rippled through the group. Lady Westholme snorted. "Poison? Preposterous. The woman was old and unwell. Heart failure is far more likely." Poirot's eyes narrowed, but his smile remained polite. "Madame, I assure you, the evidence does not lie. A heart does not fail with a needle's kiss. Now, I will speak with each of you in turn. Let us begin with the family." He turned to the Boyntons, who stiffened under his gaze. Lennox, the eldest, stepped forward, his face pale but composed. "We have nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot. Our mother was difficult, but we loved her." "Love," Poirot said softly, almost to himself, "is a curious thing, is it not? It can bind, but it can also choke." He gestured to a nearby tent. "Monsieur Lennox, if you please." Inside the tent, Poirot sat across from Lennox Boynton, the flickering lantern casting stark shadows on the canvas walls. Lennox was in his late 30s, his features handsome but worn, as if years of repression had etched lines into his face. His hands fidgeted, betraying a nervous energy. "Tell me," Monsieur Poirot began, his tone conversational, "where were you this afternoon, between the hours of 2 and 4? Lennox hesitated, his eyes flickering to the tent's entrance. "I was walking near the sick. I needed air. Alone." Poirot's voice was gentle, but his eyes were sharp. "Yes. Well, no. Nadine was with me for part of it, but she went back to check on Mother." Lennox's voice cracked slightly on the word mother. Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "And how did you find your mother, monsieur? Was she, perhaps, more demanding today?" Lennox's jaw tightened. "She was always demanding. You saw her. She controlled everything, her money, our lives, our thoughts, but I didn't kill her. If that's what you're implying." "I imply nothing," Poirot said smoothly. "I observe, and I observe that you are a man under strain. Tell me, did you see anyone near your mother's chair before her death? Anyone at all?" Lennox shook his head, but his hesitation was telling. "No one, just the family, and maybe Sarah. She was nearby, talking to Raymond." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "Merci, monsieur, you may go, but I may have more questions later." As Lennox left, Poirot's mind churned. Lennox's detachment was curious grief, yes, but tempered with something else. Relief, guilt. He made a mental note to verify Lennox's alibi with Nadine. Next, Poirot spoke with Nadine, Lennox's wife. She was a striking woman, her dark hair pulled back tightly, her eyes sharp with intelligence. Unlike Lennox, she carried herself with a quiet strength, though her hands betrayed her nerves, twisting a handkerchief as she spoke. "Madame Boynton," Poirot said, offering her a chair, "your husband tells me you were with him this afternoon. Is this correct?" Nadine nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, we walked together for a while. I returned to the camp around 3, to check on mother-in-law. She was resting in her chair." "Resting," Poirot repeated, his tone neutral. "And how did she seem to you?" Nadine's lips pressed into a thin line. She was herself, domineering, even in silence. "She didn't need to speak to make you feel small." Poirot tilted his head, studying her. "And yet, you returned to her, out of duty, perhaps." "Duty," Nadine said bitterly. "That's a kind word for it. She held us all in her grip. Monsieur Poirot, you've seen it. The money, the house, the trust, it was all hers to wield like a weapon." "A weapon," Poirot mused, "and a weapon can provoke. Now tell me, madame, did you notice anything unusual near her chair? A syringe, perhaps, or a vial?" Nadine's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. "No, nothing like that. Just her shawl, her water bottle, the usual things." Poirot smiled faintly. "Merci, madame. You have been most helpful." As Nadine left, Poirot's mind raced. Her guarded relief was palpable, but was it the relief of a woman freed from tyranny, or something more? The absence of a syringe in her account was curious, given Poirot's earlier observation. Someone was lying or hiding something. The night deepened, and Poirot continued his interviews, each conversation adding a piece to the puzzle. Raymond, the younger son, was visibly shaken, his affection for Sarah King making him vulnerable. He admitted to being near his mother's chair, but swore he saw nothing unusual. Carol, the quieter daughter, spoke in halting sentences, her eyes darting as if expecting her mother's disapproval even in death. Ginevra, the youngest, was theatrical, her grief bordering on performance, which Poirot noted with interest. Sarah King, interviewed last, was forthright. "I hated her," she admitted, her voice fierce. "She was a monster, crushing her children's spirits, but I didn't kill her, Monsieur Poirot. I wouldn't stoop to her level." "And yet," Poirot said, his tone gentle, "you were near her chair, were you not? Perhaps you saw something." Sarah frowned, then nodded. "I saw Carol, lingering nearby, looking strange, nervous. I thought she was just afraid of her mother, but now—" She trailed off, her eyes troubled. Poirot thanked her and dismissed her, his mind buzzing. The family's alibis were a tangle of contradictions, and the puncture mark remained the key. He returned to the tent where Mrs. Boynton's body lay, examining it once more under the lantern's glow. The puncture was clean, precise, a professional's work, perhaps, but who among them had the skill? Dr. Gerard, with his medical background, Sarah, the young doctor, or someone else, hiding their expertise? As the camp settled into an uneasy silence, Poirot slipped away to explore the surrounding area. The cliffs loomed like silent sentinels, their shadows concealing secrets. Near Mrs. Boynton's chair, he found a faint scuff mark in the dust, as if someone had stood there briefly, perhaps to administer the fatal dose. He crouched, his fingers brushing the ground, and found a tiny glint of metal, a fragment of a needle, barely visible. He pocketed it, his heart quickening. This was no accident. This was premeditation. Returning to the camp, Poirot sought out Dr. Gerard once more. "Monsieur," he said, holding up the fragment, "what do you make of this?" Gerard's eyes widened. "A needle broken. It could have delivered the poison. But why discard it so carelessly?" "Careless," Poirot said, his voice low. "Or deliberate, to mislead. Tell me, doctor, what poisons could cause such a swift death?" Gerard considered. "Digitoxin, perhaps. It's derived from foxglove, used in heart medication, but deadly. In high doses it would mimic heart failure, especially in someone like Mrs. Boynton, whose health was already frail." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Digitoxin, a medical poison, requiring knowledge and access. His suspect list narrowed, but the motive remained elusive. Was it freedom from Mrs. Boynton's tyranny, revenge for past cruelties, or something deeper, hidden in the family's fractured history? The night wore on, and Poirot sat alone in his tent, his notebook open before him. He sketched a timeline, marking each family member's movements. Lennox and Nadine's walk, Raymond's conversation with Sarah, Carol's nervous hovering, Ginevra's theatrical gleeful pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. The syringe he had seen in Mrs. Boynton's bag haunted him. Had she been the intended victim, or was it meant for someone else? And why the puncture mark, so blatant yet so subtle? He closed his eyes, letting his mind, his little grey cells work. The family's fear of Mrs. Boynton was palpable, but fear could breed desperation. Someone had acted, seizing the chaos of the desert to strike. But who, and why now? In Petra, under the watchful eyes of a tour group, as dawn approached, Poirot made a decision. He would secure the scene until the authorities arrived, giving him 24 hours to unravel the truth. He felt a surge of exhilaration, the thrill of the chase. The killer was close, their motives buried in the sand, but Hercule Poirot would unearth them. He rose, adjusted his tie, and stepped into the cool morning air, ready to face the day on the murderer. The cliffs of Petra stood silent, their secrets locked in stone, but Poirot knew that stones could be turned, and when they were, the truth would be revealed. Chapter 5. Motives in the sand. The sun hung low over the crimson cliffs of Petra, casting long shadows that danced like spectres across the desert floor. The ancient city, carved into the rose-red rock, seemed to pulse with secrets, its silent tombs and weathered facades bearing witness to the drama unfolding among the living. Hercule Poirot sat on a weathered stone bench near the camp, his notebook open, his small, precise handwriting capturing the morning's observations. The air was thick with heat and suspicion, the weight of Mrs. Boynton's death pressing down on the tour group like a gathering storm. Her body, now covered and secured in a shaded tent under Poirot's strict instructions, lay at the heart of the mystery. A tiny puncture mark on her wrist, whispering of murder. Poirot's mustache twitched as he reviewed his notes. The Boynton family, fractured and haunted, had revealed themselves as a tangled web of motives. Each sibling, Lennox, Nadine, Raymond, Carol, and Ginevra, carried the scars of their mother's tyranny, a psychological prison forged by years of manipulation. Yet the murder suggested more than a desperate bid for freedom. It hinted at calculation, at knowledge, at a hand steady enough to wield a syringe with lethal precision. Poirot's grey eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. The puzzle was complex, but he was in his element, piecing together fragments of human nature under the unforgiving desert sun. The camp buzzed with uneasy activity. Tour members whispered in small clusters, their glances darting toward the Boynton, who sat apart, their faces a mix of grief, relief, and guarded secrecy. Sarah King, the spirited young doctor who had joined the tour, approached Poirot, her dark curls damp with perspiration, her expression a blend of determination and unease. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, her voice low but firm, "I can't shake the feeling that something's off. The family, they're not grieving the way you'd expect. It's as if they're relieved, but terrified at the same time." Poirot inclined his head, his eyes studying her keenly. "Mademoiselle King, you have the instincts of a detective. The heart of this family is a battlefield, and the death of Madame Boynton has not ended the war, it has merely changed its rules. Tell me, what have you observed?" Sarah hesitated, glancing toward the Boyntons' tent. "It's hard to pin down. Lennox seems detached, almost numb. Nadine's calm, but it's too controlled, like she's hiding something. Raymond's jumpy, always looking over his shoulder. Carol's quiet, but there's this intensity in her eyes, like she's holding back a storm. And Ginevra," she trailed off, frowning. "Ginevra's different. She's theatrical, almost as if she's playing a part. I don't know if it's grief or something else." Poirot nodded, his fingers tapping lightly on his notebook. "Theatrical, you say? Oui, Mademoiselle Ginevra has a flair for the dramatic. But is it a mask for guilt, or merely the exuberance of youth breaking free? And you, mademoiselle, what is your interest in this family?" "I observe a certain sympathy for Monsieur Raymond." Sarah's cheeks flushed, but she met his gaze squarely. "I care about him. He's trapped, Monsieur Poirot. They all are. Mrs. Boynton was a monster, but that doesn't mean one of them killed her, or does it?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "That, mademoiselle, is the question. The heart of Menand woman is a labyrinth. Come, walk with me. Let us observe the players in this tragedy." They strolled through the camp, the sand crunching underfoot, the air heavy with the scent of dust and sun-baked stone. The Boyntons sat in a semicircle near their tent, their postures rigid, as if braced for an unseen blow. Lennox, the eldest, stared blankly at the horizon, his gaunt face etched with exhaustion. Nadine, his wife, sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes flickering with unspoken thoughts. Raymond paced nearby, his hands shoved into his pockets, while Carol sat cross-legged, her gaze fixed on the ground, her fingers tracing patterns in the sand. Ginevra, the youngest, stood apart, her auburn hair catching the sunlight as she recited lines from a play under her breath, her voice lilting and eerie. Poirot stopped a short distance away, his keen eyes taking in every detail. "Observe, Mademoiselle King," he murmured. "The family is a tableau of tension. Each is a suspect, yet each is a victim. The question is, which of them turned their pain into action?" Sarah frowned. "You think it's one of them, not an outsider?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The method, Mademoiselle, the syringe. The puncture mark suggests intimacy, knowledge, access. An outsider could have struck, but the precision of the act points to someone close, someone who knew Madame Boynton's habits, her vulnerabilities. Let us begin our inquiries." They approached the Boyntons, Poirot's demeanor calm but authoritative. "Madame et messieurs," he said, his voice carrying a quiet command. "The death of Madame Boynton is no longer a matter of natural causes. The puncture mark on her wrist suggests foul play. I must ask each of you to account for your movements yesterday afternoon." A ripple of unease passed through the family. Lennox spoke first, his voice flat. "I was with Nadine, in our tent. We were talking. I didn't see Mother after lunch." Nadine nodded, her expression composed. "That's right, we were together. Mother was sitting outside, as usual, watching everyone. I didn't notice anything unusual." Poirot's gaze shifted to Raymond, who stopped pacing and met his eyes with a mix of defiance and nervousness. "I was walking near the cliffs with Sarah," he said, glancing at her. "We were nowhere near Mother." Sarah nodded confirmation. "We were exploring the ruins. It was about 2 o'clock, I think." Carol's voice was soft but steady. "I was in the camp, reading. I saw Mother sitting in her chair, but I didn't speak to her." Ginevra's laugh was sharp, almost manic. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, it's like a play, isn't it? Everyone with their little alibis, their little lies. I was practicing my lines by the sick. I didn't see Mother, but I felt her, always watching, always judging." Her voice broke, and she turned away, her shoulders trembling. Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind was racing. The family's responses were rehearsed, almost too perfect. He made a mental note of Ginevra's theatricality. Her words felt like a performance. But was it to conceal guilt, or to distract from another's? He turned to Sarah. "Mademoiselle, will you assist me in speaking with the others in the camp? We must cast a wider net." As they walked toward the main camp, Poirot's thoughts churned. The Boyntons' alibis were flimsy, easily fabricated. Lennox's detachment could mask a calculated act. Nadine's composure suggested control, perhaps too much. Raymond's nervousness hinted at conflict, while Carol's quiet intensity suggested depths untapped. And Ginevra, her dramatics, could be a shield or a weapon. The syringe, the puncture mark, the timing all pointed to a deliberate act, but the motive remained elusive. They found Dr. Theodore Gerard near the dining tent, his lean frame bent over a notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration. The psychiatrist looked up as they approached, his dark eyes sharp with interest. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, closing his notebook, "I expected you'd seek me out. Mrs. Boynton's death is no surprise, I'm afraid. Her kind of dominance invites rebellion, often violently." Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur le Docteur, your insights into the human mind are most valuable. Tell me, what do you make of the Boynton family? Could one of them have killed their mother?" Gerard's lips pursed. Mrs. Boynton was a tyrant, a psychological jailer. Her children were her prisoners, conditioned to obey yet seething with resentment. Any one of them could have snapped, but murder by injection, that requires planning, knowledge, opportunity. Lennox is too broken, I think, to act decisively. Nadine has the strength, but her loyalty to Lennox complicates things. Raymond's passion for Miss King might have pushed him to extremes, but he lacks the precision. Carol, she's a dark horse, quiet but fierce. And Ginevra's instability could mask cunning. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You speak of medical knowledge, monsieur. Could you, perhaps, enlighten me on the matter of a syringe and a poison?" Gerard hesitated, then nodded. "A syringe suggests a drug, likely a cardiac stimulant or depressant. Digitoxin, for example, could mimic heart failure. It's derived from foxglove, easy to obtain in medical circles. A small dose, injected precisely, would kill quickly and quietly. Poirot's mustache twitched. And who among our group might have access to such a substance? Gerard's gaze flickered toward the Boynton's tent. Nadine has some nursing experience, I believe, and Sarah, of course, is a doctor. But anyone with connections could procure it. Even Lady Westholme, with her political influence, might have access through less legitimate channels. Poirot filed this away, his mind turning to the vial he had glimpsed in Mrs. Boynton's bag the previous day. Merci, Monsieur, your expertise is most illuminating. Mademoiselle King, shall we continue? They moved through the camp, questioning other tours members, a nervous American couple, a jovial archaeologist, and the imperious Lady Westholme, whose disdain for the Boyntons was palpable. Each offered little beyond vague observations of Mrs. Boynton sitting in her chair, her eyes like a hawk's, watching the camp. But one detail caught Poirot's attention. The archaeologist, Mr. Cope, mentioned seeing a small glass vial glinting in the sand near the cave where Mrs. Boynton died. Discarded, as if in haste, Poirot's heart quickened. Monsieur Cope, this vial, can you show me where you saw it? Cope led them to the spot, a shaded nook near the cave's entrance. Poirot knelt, his fingers sifting through the sand until they closed around a small, clear vial, its label partially torn but legible. Digitoxin, he held it up, his eyes gleaming with triumph. Voila, he murmured, the instrument of death. Sarah gasped. Digitoxin, that's what Dr. Gerard mentioned, but who would have access to it? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. That, mademoiselle, is the question. The vial narrows our field, but it does not yet name our killer. We must tread carefully, for the desert hides many secrets. As they returned to the camp, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the cliffs in hues of blood and gold. Poirot's mind was a whirlwind of possibilities. The vial confirmed the murder weapon, but the killer's identity remained shrouded. Was it Nadine, with her nursing background? Sarah, whose medical knowledge made her a suspect, despite her sincerity? Or someone else, like Lady Westholme, whose arrogance might conceal a darker motive? The Boyntons' alibis were shaky, their motives abundant, but the precision of the crime suggested a mind both cunning and desperate. That evening, Poirot sat alone in his tent, his notebook open, his pen moving swiftly. He sketched a diagram of the camp, marking each suspect's position at the time of the murder. The vial of digitoxin was a breakthrough, but it raised new questions. How had it been obtained? Who had the opportunity to inject Mrs. Boynton unnoticed? And why the syringe, a method both intimate and clinical? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Sarah entered, her face pale. Monsieur Poirot, I found something. It was in the sand near the dining tent, torn page from a medical journal, about digitoxin poisoning. It's too specific to be a coincidence. Poirot took the page, his eyes scanning the text. Mademoiselle, you have the instincts of a bloodhound. This page suggests our killer studied their method. But who among us would have such a journal? Sarah bit her lip. Dr. Gerard, maybe, or me. I have medical texts, but I didn't bring them here. Someone must have planned this carefully. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The page, the vial, the syringel pointed to a premeditated act. The killer was among them, hiding behind a facade of grief or innocence. He felt a surge of exhilaration, the puzzle's complexity fueling his determination. We are close, mademoiselle, he said. The truth is like the sand, it shifts, but it cannot hide forever. As Sarah left, Poirot leaned back, his eyes fixed on the tense canvas ceiling. The Boyntons were a family bound by fear, their motives as numerous as the grains of sand beneath their feet. But one of them more, someone close, had turned that fear into action. The vial of digitoxin was a key, but the lock remained elusive. Poirot closed his notebook, his mind alight with possibilities. The desert night was silent, but the truth was whispering, and Hercule Poirot was listening. Chapter 6. The Doctor's Hypothesis. The sun hung low over Petra, its dying rays painting the ancient cliffs in hues of blood and amber, as if the city itself were a canvas of secrets. The air was thick with the scent of dust and sage, stirred by a restless desert wind that seemed to whisper accusations. Hercule Poirot adjusted his straw hat, his sharp eyes scanning the campsite, where the tour group had settled after the shocking discovery of Mrs. Boynton's death. The crimson rocks loomed like silent sentinels, their jagged edges a stark contrast to the fragile human dramas unfolding below. Poirot's mind was a whirl of observations, each detail a thread in the intricate tapestry of murder. The tiny puncture mark on Mrs. Boynton's wrist, the vial of digitoxin found near the camp, the strained faces of her children all pointed to a calculated act, not a natural death. Yet the killer's identity remained elusive, a shadow dancing just beyond his grasp. He needed an ally, someone with insight into the human psyche, and Dr. Theodore Gerard, the French psychiatrist, with a penchant for studying domination, was the perfect candidate. Poirot found Dr. Gerard seated on a folding chair outside his tent, his lean frame hunched over a notebook, scribbling furiously. The doctor's wire-rimmed glasses glinted in the fading light, and his expression was one of intense concentration, as if he were dissecting the very soul of the desert itself. Poirot approached, his cane tapping lightly on the rocky ground, and cleared his throat. "Dr. Gerard," he began, his voice smooth but laced with purpose, "might I impose upon your expertise for a moment? The matter of Mrs. Boynton's demise grows ever more intriguing." Gerard looked up, his dark eyes narrowing with interest. He set his pen down and gestured to an empty chair. "Monsieur Poirot, I was hoping you'd seek me out. This case is a psychological labyrinth. Please, sit." Poirot settled into the chair, his posture impeccable despite the uneven terrain. "You have observed the Boynton family closely, Nan. Your studies of domination must offer some insight into their peculiar dynamics." Gerard leaned back, his fingers steepled. Indeed, Mrs. Boynton was a tyrant of the mind, a manipulator who wielded control like a whip. Her children were not merely obedient, they were prisoners. Her death, I suspect, was no accident. It required precision, perhaps even medical knowledge. Mustache twitched, a sign of his growing intrigue. "Medical knowledge, you say? This aligns with my own suspicions. The puncture mark on her wrist, the digitoxin vial, these suggest a deliberate act. But who among this group possesses such expertise?" Gerard's gaze drifted toward the Boynton siblings, who were gathered near their own tents, their faces pale and drawn. "Lennox, perhaps, has some rudimentary knowledge from his aborted medical studies. Nadine, his wife, is observant and clever. She might have gleaned enough from him. And then there's Sarah King, the young doctor. Her skills are undeniable, though her motives are less clear." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing each name. "And you, doctor, your own expertise in poisons, as a psychiatrist, must not be overlooked." Gerard chuckled, a dry sound like the rustle of desert leaves. "A fair point, Monsieur Poirot, but my interest lies in the mind, not the syringe. Still, I'll grant you this. The killer knew exactly what they were doing. Digitoxin is not a casual choice. It's subtle, precise, and deadly in the right hands." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden shout from the campsite. Sarah King emerged from her tent, her face flushed with agitation, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. Her dark curls were disheveled, and her eyes darted toward the Boyntons before settling on Poirot and Gerard. She strode toward them, her steps purposeful. "Monsieur Poirot, Dr. Gerard," she said, her voice trembling with urgency. "I found something in the camp. It was tucked under a rock near the path to the cliffs. You need to see this." He handed Poirot the paper, which was torn from a medical journal, its edges frayed and stained with red dust. The text described the effects of cardiac glycosides, including digitoxin, with annotations in a neat, unfamiliar hand. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he scanned the page, noting a highlighted passage about lethal dosages. "This is most illuminating, Mademoiselle King," he said, folding the paper carefully. "Where exactly did you find it?" Sarah pointed toward a narrow trail leading to the cliffs, where Mrs. Boynton's body had been found. It was half buried, as if someone tried to hide it but didn't have time. "I was walking there this morning, trying to clear my head, and I nearly tripped over it." Gerard leaned forward, his interest piqued. "This suggests premeditation. Someone researched their method thoroughly. But why leave such a damning clue?" Perhaps, Poirot mused, it was not meant to be found. Or perhaps it was discarded. In haste, a moment of panic, he turned to Sarah, his tone gentle but probing. "You are a doctor, mademoiselle. Could you have administered such a poison?" Sarah's eyes widened, her hands clenching into fists. "You can't, seriously, think I'd do this. I despised Mrs. Boynton for what she did to Raymond, but I'd never resort to murder. Besides, I was with the group when she died. I have an alibi. Poirot raised a placating hand. Calmez-vous, mademoiselle. I merely explore all possibilities. Your discovery of this page is most fortuitous, and I thank you for it. As Sarah retreated, her expression a mix of indignation and relief, Poirot turned back to Gerard. This journal page narrows our field. The killer is not only knowledgeable but careless or perhaps cunning, leaving clues to mislead us. Gerard nodded, his gaze distant. Mrs. Boynton's control over her family was absolute, but death breaks all chains. Her children are now free, yet they seem more afraid than ever. Why? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Because, mon ami, the killer is among them, or close to them. The fear you see is not just grief, it is the fear of discovery. The desert wind grew sharper, carrying the faint sound of voices from the Boynton tents. Poirot excused himself and approached the family, his steps measured but purposeful. Lennox Boynton sat on a campstool, staring blankly at the horizon, while Nadine mended a tear in a shawl, her fingers trembling slightly. Raymond paced nearby, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, and Carol stood apart, her gaze fixed on the cliffs. Ginevra, the youngest, was absent, likely inside her tent. Monsieur Boynton. Poirot addressed Lennox, his tone polite but firm. A word, if you please. Your mother's death has left many questions. You studied medicine briefly, did you not? Lennox's head snapped up, his eyes dull but wary. Years ago, I never finished. Why does it matter? Poirot smiled thinly. It matters because your mother was poisoned, likely with digitoxin. Such a substance requires knowledge to administer correctly. Did you ever study cardiac glycosides? Lennox's jaw tightened. I barely remember anatomy, let alone poisons. If you're accusing me, you're wasting your time. I was with Nadine when Mother died. Nadine's needle paused, her eyes flickering toward her husband. It's true, Monsieur Poirot. We were together, checking supplies in the camp. Poirot's gaze shifted to Nadine, noting the faint tremor in her voice. And yet, madame, a witness places you near the cliffs, shortly before the body was found. A curious discrepancy, Nan. Nadine's face paled, but she held his gaze. I went for a walk to clear my head. This family, it suffocates you. I wasn't near Mother, I swear. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. He turned to Raymond, who had stopped pacing and was watching the exchange with barely concealed anxiety. And you, Monsieur Raymond, your feelings for Mademoiselle King are evident. Did your mother's disapproval provoke extreme measures? Raymond's face flushed, his voice rising. I loved Sarah, yes, but I didn't kill my mother. She was a monster, but I couldn't do that. Carol stepped forward, her voice low but fierce. Leave him alone, Monsieur Poirot. We're all grieving. You're stirring up trouble where there's none. Poirot raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her sudden defense. Grieving, mademoiselle, or relieved. Your mother's death has freed you all, yet you seem bound by something else. Fear, perhaps. Carol's lips parted, but no words came. She turned away, her shoulders rigid. Poirot watched her retreat, his mind racing. The family's alibis were fragile, their motives abundant. But the journal page suggested an outsider's hand or a family member clever enough to mimic one. As dusk settled over Petra, Poirot returned to his tent, where Sarah was waiting, her expression a mix of determination and unease. Monsieur Poirot, she said, I've been thinking about that journal page. It's too convenient, don't you think? Like someone wanted it to be found. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A most astute observation. Mademoiselle, it is possible the killer seeks to mislead us, to cast suspicion elsewhere. But why? To protect themselves, or to implicate another? Sarah hesitated, then spoke softly. I saw Lady Westholm near the cliffs yesterday. Before the body was found, she was acting strange, furtive. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now Poirot's mustache quivered with excitement. Lady Westholm, you say? Her arrogance is a mask, perhaps for deeper motives. I shall speak with her tomorrow. For now, mademoiselle, keep this to yourself. The desert has ears. Sarah nodded, her eyes searching his. You think the killer's still here, don't you? Watching us? Oui, Poirot said, his voice low. And they are clever. But Hercule Poirot is cleverer still. As Sarah left, the desert wind howled, a mournful sound that seemed to echo Mrs. Boynton's ghostly presence. Poirot sat at his small camp table, spreading out his notes and the journal page. He sketched a diagram of the camp, marking each person's position at the time of the murder. The Boyntons' tents formed a tight cluster, with Sarah's and Gerard's nearby, and Lady Westholm's slightly apart. The cliffs where Mrs. Boynton died were a short walk away, accessible but not easily seen from the camp. Poirot's thoughts turned to Dr. Gerard's hypothesis. Medical knowledge was key, but so was opportunity. Lennox's aborted studies made him a candidate, but his apathy suggested otherwise. Nadine's intelligence and proximity to the cliffs were troubling, yet her alibi with Lennox held for now. Sarah's skills as a doctor made her a suspect, but her openness and lack of clear motive weakened the case against her. Lady Westholm, however, was an enigma. Her imperious demeanor and vague background raised questions. Could she have a connection to Mrs. Boynton's past as a prison warden? Poirot's reverie was broken by a soft knock on his tent flap. Ginevra Boynton stood there, her delicate features illuminated by the flickering lantern light. Her golden hair was loose, and her eyes were wide with a mix of fear and defiance. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "I need to tell you something, but you must promise not to tell my siblings." Poirot gestured for her to enter, his curiosity piqued. "Mademoiselle Ginevra, you have my discretion. What troubles you?" She sat on the edge of a camp chair, her hands twisting in her lap. "Mother, she wasn't just cruel, she was evil. She kept a diary, you know. I saw her writing in it, hiding it in her tent. I think it might explain why someone wanted her dead." Poirot leaned forward, his heart quickening. "A diary? Where is it now?" Ginevra's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know. I looked for it after she died, but it was gone. Someone took it. I'm scared, Monsieur Poirot. What if the killer knows I saw it?" Poirot placed a reassuring hand on hers. "Fear not, mademoiselle. You have done well to tell me. I shall search for this diary, and I shall protect you. Now, return to your tent, and speak of this to no one." Ginevra nodded, her eyes brimming with tears, and slipped out into the night. Poirot sat back, his mind ablaze. A diary could hold the key to Mrs. Boynton's past and her killer's motive, but its disappearance suggested the murderer was one step ahead, covering their tracks with ruthless efficiency. The night deepened, and the camp grew silent, save for the distant howl of the wind. Poirot lit another lantern, its glow casting shadows on the canvas walls. He reviewed his notes, adding Ginevra's revelation to the puzzle. The diary, the journal page, the digitoxinol pointed to a killer who was both bold and meticulous. But a single misstep, Poirot knew, would betray them. He stepped outside. The cool desert air a sharp contrast to the heat of his thoughts. The stars above Petra were brilliant, a tapestry of light against the infinite dark. Poirot felt a surge of confidence. The killer was among them, their mask intact but fraying at the edges. Tomorrow, he would probe deeper, question Lady Westholm, search for the diary, and tighten the net. As he returned to his tent, a gust of wind carried a faint sound, a rustle, like footsteps retreating into the shadows. Poirot's hand tightened. On his cane, his senses alert. The desert was alive with secrets, and the killer was watching. But Hercule Poirot was watching too, and he was ready to strike. Chapter 7. A web of alibis. The sun hung low over Petra, casting long shadows across the rose-red cliffs that seemed to pulse with secrets. The air was thick with heat and dust, the kind that clung to the skin and stirred unease in the heart. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the camp, his small, fastidious figure silhouetted against the ancient rock faces. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the sprawling tents and the restless figures moving among them. The death of Mrs. Boynton had shattered the fragile equilibrium of the tour group, and now, with the weight of murder hanging over them, every glance, every word, carried the potential for revelation or deception. Poirot adjusted his hat, a straw affair chosen for practicality rather than elegance, and dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief. The desert was no place for a man of his sensibilities, yet it was precisely in such unforgiving landscapes that the human soul revealed its rawest truths. He had spent the morning piecing together fragments of the previous day's events, his mind a mosaic of observations: the puncture mark on Mrs. Boynton's wrist, the vial of digitoxin found near the camp, the strained silences of her children. Now, he turned his attention to the alibis, those delicate threads that could either bind a suspect to innocence or unravel into guilt. The camp was a hive of subdued activity. The Boynton siblings, Lennox, Nadine, Raymond, Carol, and Ginevra moved like ghosts, their faces etched with a mix of relief and dread. Sarah King, the spirited young doctor who had dared to challenge Mrs. Boynton's tyranny, sat under a canvas awning, her notebook open as she scribbled observations. Dr. Theodore Gerard, the psychiatrist with a keen interest in domination, leaned against a rock, his gaze distant but calculating. Lady Westholm, the imperious parliamentarian, barked orders at a hapless guide, her voice carrying across the camp like a whip. Each of them, Poirot knew, held a piece of the puzzle. The question was how to fit them together. He began with Lennox Boynton, the eldest son, whose gaunt frame and hollow eyes suggested a man drained by years of subjugation. Poirot found him sitting alone on a folding chair, staring at the horizon, as if it might offer escape. The detective approached, with his usual courtesy, his voice smooth as polished stone. "Monsieur Boynton," Poirot began, bowing slightly, "a moment of your time, if you please. The matter of your mother's passing, it requires clarification." Lennox's head snapped up, his eyes wary. "I've told you everything, Monsieur Poirot. I was with Nadine, checking the supplies near the tents, when it happened." Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching as he studied the man's face. "Oui, so you have said. And yet, the timeline, it is a delicate thing, Nan. Let us reconstruct it together. You say you were with Madame Nadine from 3 o'clock until 4, when the body was discovered." Lennox nodded, his fingers twisting, a frayed thread on his sleeve. "Yes, we were organizing the water canisters. It's a chore Mother always insisted we do ourselves. And you saw no one else. No one passed by, perhaps, on their way to the cave where your mother was seated." Lennox hesitated, his gaze flickering to the ground. "No one." It was quiet. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The hesitation was a crack, small but significant. "Quiet, you say? Yet the camp is a busy place, is it not? Guides, tourists, the clatter of cookware. And still, you heard nothing, saw nothing." Lennox's jaw tightened. "I was focused on the task. Nadine can confirm it." "Bien, sir," Poirot said, his tone light but his mind heavy with suspicion. "I shall speak with Madame Nadine. Then mercy, monsieur." As Poirot turned away, he noted the faint sheen of sweat on Lennox's brow, despite the cooling evening air. The man was nervous, but was it the nervousness of guilt, or merely the strain of a lifetime under his mother's thumb? Poirot filed the observation away, his mental dossier growing thicker by the hour. Nadine Boynton was next. Found near the communal tent where the tour group took their meals. She was arranging plates with a mechanical precision, her dark hair pulled tightly back, her expression unreadable. Poirot approached with a smile, his manner disarming. "Madame Boynton, a word, s'il vous plaît. Your husband, he tells me you were together at the time of your mother-in-law's demise. This is correct." Nadine's hands paused, a plate hovering in mid-air. "Yes," she said, her voice steady but low. "We were checking the supplies. It's what she expected of us." Poirot nodded, his eyes tracing the lines of tension in her posture. "And you remained together the entire time, from 3 until 4. "Yes," she said, setting the plate down with a soft clink. "We didn't leave each other's side." "Most interesting," Poirot murmured. "And yet, I have heard, from a guider, Monsieur Halil, I believe that he saw you near the path to the cave at approximately 3:30, alone." Nadine's eyes widened, a flicker of alarm breaking through her composure. "He's mistaken," she said quickly. "I was with Lennox. Khalil must have seen someone else." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing. "The desert, it plays tricks on the eyes. But Monsieur Halil is a man of experience, accustomed to the ways of the sun and shadow. I shall speak with him further." Nadine's lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned back to the plates, her movements brisker now. Poirot watched her for a moment, noting the slight tremble in her hands. Another crack, another thread to pull. The guide, Khalil, was a wiry man with a sun-weathered face and eyes that missed nothing. Poirot found him tending to a camel near the edge of the camp, his hands deft as he adjusted a saddle. The detective greeted him in Arabic, a gesture that earned a nod of respect. "Salam, Monsieur Khalil, you are a man of the desert. Oui, your eyes, they see what others miss. Tell me, yesterday, at 3:30, you saw Madame Nadine near the cave path." Khalil, hands stilled, his expression cautious. "I saw a woman, yes, dark hair, slim. She was walking quickly, toward the cliffs, and you are certain it was Madame Nadine?" Poirot pressed. Khalil shrugged, his eyes narrowing. "I thought it was her, but the sun was high, and the heat, shimmers, I could be wrong. Poirot smiled, though his mind was racing. Merci, monsieur. Your memory, it is most helpful. The discrepancy was tantalizing. Nadine's alibi, corroborated by Lennox, now hung in question. Had she slipped away, unnoticed by her husband? Or was Halliel's sighting a mistake, a mirage, born of the desert's deceit? Poirot's fingers tapped against his cane, a rhythm that matched the pulse of his thoughts. Next, he sought out Carol Boynton, the quieter of the two sisters, whose reserved demeanor masked a depth Poirot had yet to plumb. He found her sitting on a rock overlooking the sick, the narrow canyon that led into Petra. Her hands were folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the distant cliffs, where the fading light painted the stone in hues of blood and gold. Mademoiselle, Carol, Poirot said, approaching with a slight bow. The beauty of Petra, it is captivating, Nan. But I fear it cannot distract from the tragedy that has befallen your family. Carol's gaze shifted to him, her expression guarded. It's no tragedy, Monsieur Poirot. Not for us. The bluntness surprised him, though he kept his face serene. A bold statement, Mademoiselle, your mother. She was a formidable woman. Her death, it frees you perhaps. Carol's fingers tightened in her lap. You don't know what it was like, she said, her voice low but fierce. Every day, every moment, under her control. We weren't her children, we were her prisoners. Poirot nodded, his eyes soft, with understanding. And yet, Mademoiselle, freedom comes at a price. Tell me, where were you between 3 and 4 yesterday, when your mother met her end? I was in my tent, Carol said quickly, reading. I didn't leave until Sarah called us to see her. Reading, Poirot repeated, his tone neutral. A solitary pursuit. No one to confirm your presence. Carol's cheeks flushed. I don't need anyone to confirm it. I was there. Poirot inclined his head, his moustache curving slightly. Of course, mademoiselle. I merely seek to clarify. The truth, it is like the sand here, it shifts, but it always reveals a pattern. As he left Carol, Poirot's mind churned. Her defensiveness was a shield, but what did it protect? A secret plan, perhaps, or simply the raw pain of a life spent in chains. He resolved to revisit her later, when her guard might be lower. The day wore on, and Poirot continued his interviews, each conversation a brushstroke on the canvas of the crime. Raymond Boynton, the youngest son, claimed he was sketching the cliffs near the camp, his alibi supported by a half-finished drawing of the treasury. Yet the drawing lacked detail, as if abandoned hastily. Ginevra, the theatrical youngest daughter, insisted she was practicing lines for an imaginary play, her voice ringing with the performer's conviction, yet her eyes darted nervously, betraying her bravado. Sarah King had been tending to a minor injury among the tour group, her medical bag open and her manner brisk, but she admitted to passing near the cave shortly before the discovery. Dr. Gerard, ever the observer, claimed he was writing notes on his study of domination. Undisturbed in his tenter, claim no one could refute or confirm. Lady Westholme proved the most challenging. Poirot found her dictating a letter to her beleaguered secretary, Miss Pierce, her voice booming with authority. She greeted him with a scowl, her broad frame blocking the entrance to her tent like a sentinel. Monsieur Poirot, I trust this is important. I have no time for idle chatter. Poirot bowed, undeterred. Madame, the matter of murder is never idle. Your movements yesterday, between 3 and 4, where were you? Lady Westholme's eyes narrowed. I was touring the royal tombs with Miss Pierce. We were nowhere near that dreadful woman's cave. Miss Pierce, a mousy woman with trembling hands, nodded vigorously. Oh yes, we were at the tombs. Lady Westholme was explaining the Nabatean architecture. Fascinating, really. Poirot's smile was polite, but sharp. Fascinating, indeed. And you remained together the entire time? Of course, Lady Westholme snapped. I'm not in the habit of wandering off alone. Notre Dame, Poirot said, his tone soothing. And yet, the tombs are vast. Nan, one might step away for a moment, perhaps to admire a view. Lady Westholme's face reddened. Are you suggesting I had something to do with that woman's death? Preposterous. Poirot raised a hand, placating. I suggest nothing, madame. I merely seek the truth. As he left the tent, Poirot's mind buzzed. Lady Westholme's indignation felt rehearsed, and Miss Pierce's nervous agreement lacked conviction. Another thread, another knot to untangle. By dusk, Poirot returned to his tent, his notebook filled with scribbled observations. He sat at a small folding table, a single lantern casting a warm glow over his papers. The alibis formed a web, intricate and fragile, with contradictions weaving through like cracks in stone. Nadine's sighting near the cave, Carol's solitary reading. Lady Westholm's imperious certainty held a hint of deceit, yet to minor suspects, a pair of American tourists who had been photographing the cliffs with a guide, provided airtight alibis, their cameras time-stamped with images far from the crime scene. Poirot crossed their names from his list, a small victory that sharpened his focus. He leaned back, his eyes half closed, and let the pieces settle in his mind. The killer was among them, hidden behind a mask of grief or indifference. The syringe, the digitoxin, the overheard remark, they pointed to a calculated act, not a spur-of-the-moment crime, but whose hand had wielded the needle. And why? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Sarah King stood at the tent's entrance, her face pale but determined. "Monsieur Poirot, I need to speak with you," Entrez Mademoiselle Poirot said, gesturing to a chair. "What troubles you?" Sarah sat, her hands clasped tightly. "It's about Raymond. I saw him near the cave yesterday, just before 4. He didn't see me, but he looked agitated. I didn't want to say anything earlier, but I can't keep quiet anymore." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Most interesting, mademoiselle. And you are certain of the time?" "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "It was just before I found Mrs. Boynton. I thought he was just upset, but now, I don't know." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Another discrepancy, another thread. "Merci, Mademoiselle King. Your candor, it is invaluable." As Sarah left, Poirot returned to his notes, his pen scratching across the page. The web of alibis was tightening, and he felt a surge of satisfaction. 2 suspects eliminated, a handful of contradictions uncovered, and now a new clue. Raymond, near the cave, agitated. The puzzle was far from solved, but Poirot was confident. He was closing in. He retired to his cot, the desert night pressing against the tent, and closed his eyes, certain that tomorrow would bring him closer to the truth. Chapter 9. The mask slips. The sun hung low over Petra's crimson cliffs, casting jagged shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the ancient stone. The air was thick with the day's heat, now cooling into a restless evening, as if the desert itself sensed the tension coiling among the tour group. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the camp, his small, fastidious figure incongruous against the wild grandeur of the Nabatean ruins. His mustache twitched as he surveyed the assembled faces, each a mask of unease, guilt, or defiance. The time had come to peel those masks away. Poirot had orchestrated this gathering with the precision of a conductor, arranging the group in a semicircle near the mouth of a cavern, its dark maw a silent witness to the drama about to unfold. The Boynton siblings sat close together, their postures rigid, as though still bound by their late mother's iron will. Lennox, the eldest, stared blankly at the ground, his hands clasped tightly, while Nadine's sharp eyes darted between her husband and Poirot, betraying a flicker of dread. Raymond, his face pale but resolute, sat beside Sarah King, whose defiance had softened into quiet determination. Carol's fingers twisted a handkerchief, her quiet intensity a stark contrast to Ginevra's theatrical stillness, her golden hair catching the fading light like a halo. Dr. Theodore Gerard stood slightly apart, his psychiatrists' gaze dissecting the scene, while Lady Westholm, imperious as ever, sat with her arms crossed, her lips pursed in disdain. The other tour members, minor players in this deadly game, shifted uncomfortably, their presence a necessary chorus to Poirot's impending revelation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, cutting through the murmurs of the group. "We are gathered here, in this ancient city of secrets, to confront a truth most modern and most sinister. A murder has been committed, and the murderer sits among us." A collective intake of breath rippled through the group. Lady West snorted, her voice dripping with scorn. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, this melodrama is tiresome. If you have evidence, produce it, and spare us the theatrics." Poirot's eyes gleamed, undeterred. "Patience, Lady West. The truth, like the carvings in these cliffs, requires time to reveal its full form. But rest assured, the evidence is here, and it speaks loudly." He paced slowly, his polished shoes crunching against the sandy earth, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us begin with the facts. Mrs. Boynton, a woman of formidable will, was found dead with a puncture mark on her wrist, a mark that suggests not a natural death, but a deliberate act. A syringe, a vial of digitoxin, a torn page from a medical journal. These are the threads of our tapestry. But the pattern, mise Amos, lies in the motives, the opportunities, and the lies. He turned to the Boynton family, his gaze softening, but remaining piercing. The Boyntons, each of you, lived under a shadow. Mrs. Boynton was no mere mother. She was a tyrant, a jailer of the mind and soul. Her death, to some, was liberation. But who among you dared to act? Lennox shifted, his voice low and strained. You're wrong to suspect us, Poirot. We were trapped, yes, but we didn't. I didn't. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Monsieur Lennox, your detachment is noted, but it is not yet exoneration. Let us consider the others. Mademoiselle Carroll, your quiet strength intrigues me. You spoke little, yet your eyes betray a secret. What is it you fear to reveal? Carroll's hand stilled, her knuckles white around the handkerchief. I don't know what you mean, she whispered, but her voice trembled, a crack in her composure. Poirot's attention shifted to Ginevra, whose theatrical poise had begun to fray. And you, Mademoiselle Ginevra, with your flair for drama, did you play a role in this tragedy, or merely observe it? Ginevra's eyes widened, her voice rising in a near hysterical pitch. I hated her. We all did. But I didn't touch her. I swear it. She was a monster, but I'm no killer. Her outburst drew gasps from the group, and Raymond reached out to steady her, his own face etched with worry. Poirot nodded, as if her reaction confirmed a private theory. Your passion is noted, mademoiselle, but passion alone does not a murderer make. He turned to Nadine, whose guarded expression had not wavered. Madame Boynton, you are a woman of loyalty, yet I sense a conflict within you. You stood by your husband, but did you also stand by your mother-in-law, or did you see her death as a path to freedom? Nadine's lips parted, then closed. I was with Lennox when she died. I told you that. Indeed, Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild, yet a witness places you near the cave at the critical hour. A curious discrepancy, Nan. Nadine's eyes flashed, but she said nothing, her silence a wall Poirot could not yet breach. He pivoted to Sarah, whose presence had been a catalyst in the family's unraveling. Mademoiselle King, your courage in challenging Mrs. Boynton was admirable, but it also made you a target. Did your love for Monsieur Raymond drive you to act, to protect him from her tyranny? Sarah's cheeks flushed, but her voice was steady. I despised her, Monsieur Poirot, but I didn't kill her. I wanted Raymond free, not through murder, but through love. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile beneath it. Love, yes, a powerful motive, but not the only one. He turned to Dr. Gerard, whose calm demeanor had been a constant throughout the investigation. Doctor, your expertise in the mind is invaluable. You suggested the killer required medical knowledge. Did you, perhaps, see too much of Mrs. Boynton's cruelty and decide to intervene? Gerard's eyebrows rose, but he chuckled softly. A clever suggestion, Monsieur Poirot, but I am a healer, not a destroyer. My interest was academic. Her pathology fascinated me, nothing more. Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on Gerard before settling on Lady Westholm. And you, Lady Westholm, with your commanding presence and your disdain for weakness, Mrs. Boynton was a force to rival your own. Did her existence offend you, perhaps enough to act? Lady Westholm's face hardened, her voice cutting like a blade. This is absurd. I had no reason to involve myself in that woman's affairs. I am here for archaeology, not petty family squabbles. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a soft, dangerous cadence. Yet, madame, it is curious that you were seen near the cave shortly before Mrs. Boynton's death, and your knowledge of medicine, gained during your charitable work, is well documented. A coincidence, perhaps. The group stirred, whispers rippling like a desert breeze. Lady Westholm's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, her eyes darting to the side before returning to Poirot. You have no proof, she said, her voice icy. Poirot smiled, a predator closing in. Proof, Lady Westholm, is in the details. And the details, they betray you. He reached into his pocket and produced a small object, holding it aloft for all to see, a slender needle, glinting in the firelight. This mise Amos was found by Mademoiselle King near the cave, a needle that matches the puncture on Mrs. Boynton's wrist. It is not a common tool, but one used with precision by someone with knowledge of anatomy and access to Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. I found it this morning, near the path. I didn't think. You did well, Mademoiselle, Poirot said, his voice warm but firm. This needle is the key. It was discarded in haste, but not haste enough to escape Hercule Poirot. He paced again, his movements deliberate, drawing the group's attention like a magnet. Let us reconstruct the scene. Mrs. Boynton sat alone, her chair positioned to watch the camp, her dominance unchallenged. Even in solitude, the killer approached, swift and silent, administering the fatal dose. But why? Why risk such an act in broad daylight, with witnesses nearby? The answer lies in opportunity and in hatred. He stopped before Lady Westholme, his eyes locking onto hers. Madame, you spoke of archaeology, but your past is not so buried. Mrs. Boynton, as a prison warden, crossed paths with many. Did she cross yours? Did her cruelty, her power, remind you of a wrong Lady Westholme's face paled, her hands tightening on her arms. You're grasping, Poirot. I had no connection to her. Poirot's voice softened, almost pitying. But you did, madame. A document, uncovered among Mrs. Boynton's effects, mentions a prisoner from her days as a wardener, woman of status, humiliated, whose life was altered by her sentence. That woman, Lady Westholme, was connected to you through your charitable work, was she not? A sister, perhaps, or a dear friend, broken by Mrs. Boynton's cruelty. The group gasped, and Lady Westholme's mask cracked, her eyes blazing with fury. You dare accuse me on such flimsy grounds? I will not stand for this. Poirot raised a hand, his voice now commanding. You stood near the cave, madame. You had the knowledge, the means, and the motive. The needle, the digitoxin, the overheard. Remark, you see, don't you, that she's got to be killed. It was you who spoke those words, overheard by Poirot himself, through the window in Jerusalem. You planned this, Lady Westholme, and you executed it with the precision of a woman who brooks no failure. The camp was silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling like dust. Lady Westholme rose, her stature imposing, but her voice trembled. You have no witnesses, no proof beyond conjecture. Poirot's smile was cold. But I do, madame. The needle bears a trace of your perfumer distinctive scent, worn by no one else in this camp, and the torn page from the medical journal, found in your tent, confirms your study of poisons. You underestimated Hercule Poirot, and that was your mistake. Lady Westholme staggered back, her face a mask of defeat. The Boyntons stared, their expressions a mix of shock and relief, while Sarah clutched Raymond's hand, tears in her eyes. Dr. Gerard nodded slowly, as if confirming a diagnosis. Poirot turned to the group, his voice softening. The truth is revealed, but it is not yet complete. Tomorrow, we will gather again, and I will lay bare the final pieces of this puzzle. For now, let us retire, and let justice rest until the dawn. As the group dispersed, their whispers echoing in the night, Poirot stood alone, his eyes on the stars. He had identified the murderer, but the why and how still danced in his mind, a puzzle nearly complete. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing the trap had closed, but a deeper question lingered. Had justice truly been served, or was there more to uncover in the shadow of Petra's cliffs? The night deepened, and Poirot retreated to his tent, his mind alive with the day's revelations. He lit a small lamp, its glow casting flickering shadows on the canvas walls, and opened his notebook. The pages were filled with meticulous note sketches of motives, timelines, and alibis, each a piece of the intricate mosaic he had constructed. But now, with Lady Westholme's guilt all but confirmed, he felt the need to revisit the details, to ensure no thread had been overlooked. He traced his finger over the entry for the overheard remark. You see, don't you, that she's got to be killed? The words had haunted him since Jerusalem, their venomous intent clear even through the hotel window. He had assumed, at first, that they came from a Boynton, their resentment against their mother palpable. But the voice, he now realized, had carried a different cadence, clipped, authoritative. Unmistakably Lady Westholme's. Her presence in Jerusalem, her proximity to Mrs. Boynton's room, had been no coincidence. She had been plotting even then, her hatred rooted in a past Poirot had only begun to uncover. He turned to the needle, now safely stored in a small envelope in his pocket. Its discovery by Sarah had been fortuitous, but not accidental. Poirot had guided her to the path, knowing her sharp eyes would spot what others missed. The needle's significance lay not only in its function but in its origin. It was not a common medical tool, but one used in specialized procedures, requiring expertise Lady Westholme possessed through her work with medical charities. The perfume, tracer, rare blend of jasmine and sandalwood had been the final link, a detail so subtle only Poirot's fastidious nature would catch it. He closed the notebook, his mind drifting to the Boyntons. Their liberation was bittersweet, their lives forever marked by their mother's tyranny. Ginevra's outburst had been genuine, he was certain, but Carol's silence troubled him. Her fear, her guarded glances, suggested a secret yet unrevealed. Was it guilt, or something else? Poirot resolved to press her gently in the morning, to coax the truth from her quiet heart. As he extinguished the lamp, the desert's silence enveloped him, broken only by the distant howl of a jackal. He lay back, his mind still turning, the puzzle's edges sharp and clear. Tomorrow, he would reveal the full truth, not only of Lady Westholme's crime, but of the human frailties that had woven this tragedy. For now, he rested content that the mask had slipped, and the murderer stood exposed. The morning dawned with a fierce clarity, the sun igniting Petra's cliffs in hues of fire and blood. Poirot emerged from his tent, his suit impeccable despite the desert's dust, his demeanor calm but resolute. The group had gathered again, their faces a mix of anticipation and dread. Lady Westholme sat apart, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the horizon, as if willing herself elsewhere. Poirot began without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Ms. Amos, last night I named the murderer, but the story is not yet complete. There are threads to tie, motives to clarify, and truths to lay bare. He turned to Carol, his gaze gentle but probing. Mademoiselle Carol, you have carried a burden through this ordeal. Will you share it now, or shall Poirot reveal it for you? Carol's eyes widened, her hands trembling. I didn't kill her, Monsieur Poirot, but I knew someone wanted her dead. I heard her, Lady Westholme, talking to someone in Jerusalem. I didn't understand then, but now. Poirot nodded, encouraging her. And what did you hear, mademoiselle? Carol's voice was barely a whisper. She said, she's a poison, and poisons must be purged. I thought she meant mother's influence, but now I see. It was more. Poirot's eyes softened. You are brave, mademoiselle. Your silence protected no one, but it was born of fear, not guilt. He turned to the group, his voice rising. Lady Westholme's motive was not mere dislike, but a deep, personal wound. Her sister, a woman of promise, was imprisoned under Mrs. Boynton's wardenship, her spirit broken by cruelty. Lady Westholme, in her pride and rage, saw Mrs. Boynton's death as justice, not murder. But justice, mise et mis, belongs to the law, not to vengeance. Lady Westholme rose, her voice a hiss. You cannot prove this, Poirot. You weave stories, nothing more. Poirot's smile was serene. The proof, madame, is in your own words, your actions, and the evidence that surrounds you. The authorities will find the rest when they arrive. As the group murmured, Poirot stepped back, his work nearly done. The Boyntons, freed from their mother's shadow, began to speak among themselves, their voices tentative but hopeful. Sarah and Raymond stood together, their hands entwined, a symbol of love triumphant. Dr. Gerard approached Poirot, a wry smile on his lips. You've done it again, Monsieur Poirot, he said. A mind like yours is a rare thing. Poirot inclined his head. The mind, doctor, is a garden. It must be tended, pruned, and allowed to grow. This case, it was a challenge, but the truth always blooms in the end. As the sun climbed higher, Poirot walked away from the group, his steps light, his heart content. The mask had slipped, the truth was revealed, and Petra's cliffs stood silent, their secrets safe once more. Chapter 10. The verdict. At Petra, the sun dipped low over the rose-red cliffs of Petra, casting long shadows across the ancient Nabatean city. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and time, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of wind through the narrow sick. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the tour group, his small, meticulous figure framed by the towering sandstone pillars of the treasury. His mustache twitched slightly, a sign of the quiet satisfaction that stirred within him. The puzzle was complete. The threads of motive, opportunity, and deception had been woven into a tapestry of truth. Now, it was time to unveil the killer. The group gathered in a loose semicircle, their faces a mosaic of anticipation, fear, and exhaustion. The Boynton family, Lennox, Nadine Raymond, Carol, and Genevieve rest close together, their expressions a blend of relief and unease, as if the weight of their mother's tyranny still lingered like a ghost. Sarah King, her dark hair catching the fading light, stood beside Raymond, her hand brushing his in a gesture of quiet support. Dr. Theodore Gerard, the psychiatrist, adjusted his glasses, his sharp eyes scanning the group with clinical curiosity. Lady Westholme, her posture rigid and imperious, clutched her parasol like a scepter, her lips pursed in disdain. The other two members, Mr. Cope, the affable American, and Miss Pierce, the nervous spinster, hovered at the edges, their presence almost incidental to the drama unfolding. Poirot cleared his throat, his voice calm but commanding, cutting through the desert stillness. Mesdames et messieurs, we stand in the heart of Petra, a place where secrets have been carved into stone for centuries. But today, it is not the secrets of the Nabateans we uncover. It is the secret of a murderer, murder most calculated, most cruel, and most cunning. A murmur rippled through the group. Nadine's hand tightened on Lennox's arm, and Ginevra's eyes widened, her theatrical flair barely contained. Lady Westholme snorted, her voice dripping with scorn. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, must you be so theatrical? The woman died of heart failure. This is all quite unnecessary." Poirot's eyes gleamed, undeterred. "Heart failure, Lady Westholme, Nan. The heart of Mrs. Boynton did not fail her. It was stopped deliberately, by a single, precise injection of a tiny puncture mark on her wrist, overlooked by all but the most observant, tells the tale. And I, Hercule Poirot, am most observant." Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Then who, Monsieur Poirot, who did it? You've kept us in suspense long enough." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture both placating and commanding. "Patience, Mademoiselle King. To reveal the truth, we must first retrace the path that led us here. Let us begin with the remark I overheard in Jerusalem, drifting through the window of the King Solomon Hotel. You see, don't you, that she's got to be killed?" Those words, spoken in the shadows, were the spark that ignited my curiosity. But whose voice spoke them, and why? He paced slowly, his polished shoes leaving faint imprints in the sand. Mrs. Boynton was a woman of immense power, not of wealth or status, but of the mind. A former prison warden, she wielded control like a weapon, binding her family in chains of fear and guilt. Her children, Lennox, Nadine, Raymond, Carol, and Ginevra, were her prisoners, their spirits crushed under her gaze. Each had a motive to wish her gone. Lennox, trapped in a loveless marriage, yearned for freedom. Nadine, torn between duty and desire, dreamed of escape. Raymond, enamored with Mademoiselle King, faced disinheritance. Carol, quiet but fierce, hid her resentment. And Ginevra, the dreamer, lived in a world of her own, perhaps too fragile to endure her mother's cruelty. Ginevra let out a small gasp, her hands fluttering to her chest. I couldn't. Poirot raised a finger, silencing her gently. "Patience, mademoiselle. We will come to you in time. But let us not forget the others in our little drama. Mademoiselle King, whose defiance of Mrs. Boynton's authority made her a target. Dr. Gerard, whose expertise in the human mind gave him insight into her tyranny, and perhaps the means to end it. And Lady Westholme, whose disdain for Mrs. Boynton was as palpable as the desert heat." Lady Westholme's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. "I hope you're not suggesting I had anything to do with this nonsense, Monsieur Poirot. I am a woman of principle, not a murderer." Poirot smiled faintly, his gaze unwavering. "Principle, Lady Westholme, perhaps, but let us examine the facts. Mrs. Boynton was found dead in her chair, beneath the Crimson Cliffs, with a puncture mark on her wrist. Digitoxin, a poison derived from the foxglove plant, was the instrument of her demise. It is a substance requiring medical knowledge to administer correctly a single dose, too precise to be accidental, and yet the scene was staged to suggest heart failure, a natural death. Why? To divert suspicion, to protect the guilty." Dr. Gerard leaned forward, his voice measured. "You're suggesting someone with medical expertise, then? That narrows the field considerably." "Precisement," Dr. Poirot replied, his eyes glinting. "But expertise alone is not enough. The killer required opportunity, motive, and a mind capable of deception. Let us consider the timeline. Mrs. Boynton was last seen alive at 4 o'clock, sitting alone outside her tent. By 6 o'clock, she was dead. During those 2 hours, each of you had the chance to approach her. But who had the means? The will. Poirot turned to the Boynton family, his gaze softening slightly. Let us begin with the family. Lennox, you claimed to be reading in your tent, but no one saw you there. Nadine, you said you were with Lennox, yet a Bedouin guide saw you near the cave at 4:30. Raymond, you were walking with Mademoiselle King, but your alibi ends at 5. Carol, you were seen pacing near the cliffs, alone. And Ginevra, your theatrical tears and fainting spells, were they genuine, or a performance to distract? Carol's face paled, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't do it. I hated her, but I didn't enough. Mademoiselle Poirot said gently, I do not accuse you, not yet, but let us consider another clue. The syringe found in Mrs. Boynton's bag, and later, the vial of digitoxin in the camp. These items were not placed there by accident. They were meant to be found. 2 points suspicion toward the family. And yet, another clue emerged. Mademoiselle King. You found a discarded needle near the cave, hidden among the rocks. A careless mistake, or a deliberate misdirection? Sarah nodded, her expression resolute. I gave it to you, Monsieur Poirot. It was rusted, but the tip was still sharp. Someone used it and tried to hide it. Exactamente, Poirot said, his voice rising slightly. And that needle, Mies, Amos, is the key. It was not the syringe in Mrs. Boynton's bag that delivered the fatal dose. That was a decoy, meant to confuse. The true weapon was the needle, wielded by a hand both steady and cunning. Lady Westholm's parasol tapped the ground impatiently. This is absurd. You're spinning a tale out of nothing. Why would anyone go to such lengths? Mrs. Boynton was a dreadful woman, but murder, preposterous. Poirot's eyes locked onto hers, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Is it, Lady Westholm? Let us consider you for a moment. A woman of influence, of strong opinions, and most intriguingly of a past that intersects with Mrs. Boynton's. You see, I made inquiries. Before you were Lady Westholm, Member of Parliament, you were Eleanor Grayson, a young woman whose brother was imprisoned in Dartmoor, under the wardenship of none other than Mrs. Boynton. A collective gasp rose from the group. Lady Westholm's face drained of colour, her parasol trembling in her grip. How dare you? That is a private matter, and you have no right. I have every right. Poirot interrupted, his voice like steel. Your brother, James Grayson, suffered under Mrs. Boynton's regime. He died in that prison, broken by her cruelty. You blamed her, did you not? You carried that hatred for years, nursing it like a wound. And when chance brought you to Jerusalem, to the same tour group as your old enemy, you saw your opportunity. Lady Westholm's lips quivered, but she straightened, her voice icy. This is slander. You have no proof. Oh, but I do, Poirot said, producing a small folded piece of paper from his pocket. This is a page from a medical journal, torn and discarded near the camp. It describes the use of digitoxin as a poison, its symptoms, its administration. And do you know where I found it? Near your tent, Lady Wet. Your knowledge of medicine, gained during your charitable work, gave you the expertise. Your access to the camp's medical supplies gave you the means, and your hatred gave you the motive. The group was silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them. Nadine's eyes darted to Lady Westholm, then to Poirot, as if seeing the truth for the first time. Raymond clutched Sarah's hand, his face a mixture of shock and relief. But there is more, Poirot continued, his voice relentless. The remark I overheard in Jerusalem, you see, don't you, that she's got to be killed, was not spoken by a Boynton. It was spoken by you, Lady Westholm, to Mr. Cope, your unwitting confidant. You thought no one could hear, but the wind carried your words to my window. You planned this murder, carefully, methodically, and you used the Boynton family's misery to mask your crime. You planted the syringe in Mrs. Boynton's bag, knowing it would point to her children. You discarded the needle, believing it would never be found. But you underestimated Hercule Poirot. Lady Westholm's composure shattered. Her parasol fell to the ground, and her hands clenched into fists. You can't prove any of this, she hissed. It's your word against mine. Poirot shook his head, his expression almost pitying. Nan, Lady Westholm, it is not my word. It is the evidence, the needle, the journal page, the testimony of the Bedouin guide who saw you near Mrs. Boynton's chair at the critical moment. And it is the truth, written in your own actions. You killed Mrs. Boynton, not for justice, but for revenge. A sob broke from Ginevra, and she buried her face in Carol's shoulder. Lennox stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "Is it true? She's really gone, and it wasn't one of us?" Poirot nodded, his gaze softening. "It is true, Monsieur Boynton. Your family is free not only of your mother's tyranny, but of suspicion. You may begin to live again." Sarah turned to Raymond, her eyes bright with tears. "We're free, Raymond. We can be together." Raymond pulled her close, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought this day would come." Dr. Gerard approached Poirot, his expression one of admiration. "Remarkable, Monsieur Poirot. You saw what none of us could." Poirot inclined his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It is the little grey cells, Dr. They do not rest until the truth is found." As the group began to disperse, the Bedouin guides arrived with local authorities, summoned by Poirot's earlier message. Lady Westholm, her defiance crumbling, was led away, her head held high despite the cuffs on her wrists. The Boyntons, still reeling, gathered their belongings, their faces a mixture of grief and tentative hope. Sarah and Raymond walked hand in hand toward the sick, their future uncertain but bright with possibility. Poirot lingered, his eyes tracing the contours of Petra's ancient stones. The stars were emerging, pinpricks of light against the vast desert sky. He adjusted his hat, his heart light with the satisfaction of a case well solved. "Justice," he murmured to himself, "is a delicate balance, but tonight it is served." He turned and walked toward the sick, his silhouette fading into the shadows of the ancient city, leaving behind a story etched in the sands of Petra's story of tyranny, betrayal, and the triumph of truth. Chapter 8. The heart of betrayal. The sun hung low over Petra's crimson cliffs, casting jagged shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the desert floor. The air was thick with the day's heat, though a faint breeze stirred the dust, carrying with it the scent of ancient stone and unspoken secrets. Hercule Poirot sat on a weathered boulder outside his tent, his small, precise hands folded neatly over his walking stick. His grey eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the encampment where the Boynton family and their fellow travellers moved like actors in a play, whose script he was determined to unravel. The death of Mrs. Boynton, that domineering matriarch, had cast a pall over the group, but it was the undercurrent of fear and guilt that fascinated Poirot. Someone among them had plunged a needle into her wrist, and the truth, he felt, was now within his grasp. The camp was a hive of muted activity. Tents flapped gently in the breeze, their canvas walls glowing faintly with the light of oil lamps. Within, the Boynton siblings, Nadine, Raymond, Carol, and Ginevra moved with the cautious deliberation of those who knew they were being watched. Sarah King, the spirited young doctor who had challenged Mrs. Boynton's tyranny, sat apart, her notebook open on her lap as she scribbled observations, her dark hair falling in a curtain over her face. Dr. Theodore Gerard, the psychiatrist, with a keen interest in domination, paced near the communal fire, his brow furrowed in thought. Lady Westholm, the imperious parliamentarian, stood barking orders at a local guide, her voice cutting through the evening's quiet like a whip. Poirot's lips twitched into a faint smile. Each of them, in their way, was performing. But one performance he knew was a lie. He rose, brushing the dust from his immaculate suit, and made his way toward the center of the camp. His steps were measured, his posture erect, a man whose very presence commanded attention without demanding it. The discovery of the vial of digitoxin the previous day had been a breakthrough, narrowing the field of suspects to those with access to such a poison. The torn page from a medical journal, found by Sarah near the camp's edge, had further tightened the noose, but it was the psychological undercurrents, the resentments, fears, and desires swirling beneath the surface that Poirot now sought to probe. He had a theory, a delicate web of motive and opportunity, but it needed testing. And tonight, he would cast his net. A confrontation in the twilight. The communal fire crackled as the group gathered for dinner, a makeshift affair of flatbread, dates, and roasted lamb served on tin plates. Poirot took his seat at the edge of the circle, his plate untouched, his eyes darting from face to face. Sarah sat beside Raymond, their shoulders brushing in a way that spoke of unspoken promises. Nadine, Lennox's wife, sat opposite, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression unreadable. Lennox himself stared into the fire, his face a mask of exhaustion, while Carol fidgeted with her scarf, her eyes darting toward Ginevra, who was reciting poetry to herself in a low, theatrical murmur. Lady Westholm, seated stiffly, dominated, the conversation with tales of her political triumphs, though her audience seemed more polite than engaged. Poirot cleared his throat, a small sound that somehow silenced the chatter. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate. "It is a curious thing, is it not, how death sharpens our perceptions? Since the tragedy of Mrs. Boynton, I have observed much. The human heart, it reveals itself in moments of crisis." "Nan!" The group shifted uncomfortably. Lady Westholm snorted. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, must we dwell on the morbid? The woman had a weak heart. It's hardly a mystery." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A weak heart, perhaps, but a puncture mark on the wrist, a vial of digitoxin found among the camp's refuse. These are not the symptoms of a natural death." "Lady Westholm," a murmur rippled through the group. Sarah's eyes widened, and she leaned forward. "You're certain it was murder, then?" "Certain." Poirot tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "Hercule Poirot does not deal in certainties until all pieces of the puzzle are in place. But I am persuaded, and I am curious. Tell me, Madame Nadine, where were you when Mrs. Boynton was last seen alive?" Nadine's head snapped up, her lips parting slightly. I was with Lennox. We were walking near the tents. I told you this already." You did," Poirot said, his tone gentle but unrelenting. "Yet a guide claims to have seen you alone, near the cave where Mrs. Boynton sat. A curious discrepancy, Nan." Nadine's hands tightened in her lap, her knuckles whitening. The guide must be mistaken. It was chaotic that afternoon. People were everywhere. Lennox stirred, his voice low and strained. "Leave her alone, Poirot. Nadine wouldn't hurt anyone. You know that." Poirot's eyes softened, but only slightly. "Monsieur Lennox, I seek only the truth. And the truth, it is like the sand of this desert, it slips through the fingers unless one holds it carefully." Sarah interjected, her voice sharp. "Monsieur Poirot, if you're suggesting Nadine had something to do with it, I think you're wrong. She's been nothing but kind to me, even when Mrs. Boynton was impossible." Poirot turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Mademoiselle King, your heart is generous, but the heart can blind as well as guide. You care for Monsieur Raymond, do you not? And yet, his mother threatened to disinherit him should he pursue you. A powerful motive, perhaps, for someone to act." Raymond's face flushed, and he stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone. "That's enough, Poirot. I loved Sarah, yes, but wouldn't he?" broke off. His breath ragged. Sarah reached for his hand, her voice steady. "Sit down, Raymond. He's just trying to get a reaction. He doesn't really think you did it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Do I not? Or perhaps I think many things, mademoiselle. The human heart is a labyrinth, and I am but a humble explorer." The hidden letter. Later that evening, as the group dispersed, Poirot slipped away to his tent, where he had hidden a discovery that had come to light earlier that day. In the folds of Mrs. Boynton's shawl, left behind in her chair, he had found a letter crumpled as though someone had tried to destroy it but thought better of it. He smoothed it out, now under the flickering light of his lamp, his fingers tracing the sharp, angular handwriting. "My children," it began, "you have disappointed me. Your weakness, your defiance, your pitiful rebellions, they are an affront to my authority. Know this, if any of you dare to cross me, to seek your own paths without my blessing, you will be cast out. The inheritance you so desperately cling to will be stripped away. You are mine, and you will remain so, or you will have nothing." The letter was unsigned, but its author was unmistakable. Mrs. Boynton's voice dripped from every word, her venom as potent in death as it had been in life. Poirot leaned back, his mind racing. The letter was a motive in itself, blade held over the heads of her children, threatening to sever their future. But who had acted on it? Raymond, whose love for Sarah had been forbidden. Nadine, whose quiet strength masked a desperate desire for freedom, or perhaps Carol, whose silent intensity hinted at depths unspoken. He tucked the letter into his pocket and stepped outside, the night air cool against his skin. The camp was quiet now, save for the distant howl of a jackal. Poirot's gaze settled on Nadine's tent, where a faint light glowed. He had seen her slip away after dinner, her movements hurried, as though she carried a burden she could not share. He made his way toward her tent, his steps silent on the sandy ground. "Madame Nadine," he called softly, pausing outside the canvas flap. "A word, if you please." The flap opened, and Nadine stood there, her face pale in the moonlight. "Monsieur Poirot, it's late. What do you want?" "To understand," he said simply. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. The tent was sparse, with a cot, a small table, and a single chair. A notebook lay open on the table, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. Poirot's eyes flicked to it, but he said nothing, seating himself with a polite nod. "Madame," he began, "you are a woman of intelligence and strength, yet you carry a weight. I see it in your eyes, in the way you hold yourself. Tell me, what did Mrs. Boynton hold over you?" Nadine's lips tightened. "You're fishing, Monsieur Poirot. I've told you everything. I was with Lennox when she died. I had no reason to harm her, no reason." Poirot reached into his pocket and produced the letter, holding it up but not yet unfolding it. "This suggests otherwise. A threat to disinherit, to control even from beyond the grave. It is a heavy burden, Nan." Nadine's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of speaking. Then she turned away, her shoulders rigid. "That letter means nothing. She was always threatening us. It was her way." "But it was not an empty threat," Poirot pressed. "You wished to leave, to start a new life with Lennox, away from her shadow. And yet, you stayed. Why?" Nadine's voice was barely a whisper. "Because we had no choice. She owned us our money, our futures, everything. But I didn't kill her, Poirot. I swear it." Poirot studied her, his gaze piercing but not unkind. "I believe you wish to believe that, Madame, but the heart, it betrays us sometimes. If you know something, anything, now is the time to speak." She shook her head, her eyes glistening. "I can't. I won't. You don't understand what it was like, living under her. You can't." Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Perhaps not, but I understand this. The truth will not stay buried. And I, Hercule Poirot, will find it." A whisper of rebellion the next morning. Poirot sought out Sarah, finding her sketching the cliffs near the camp's edge. Her pencil moved with quick, confident strokes, capturing the stark beauty of Petra's stone spires. She looked up as he approached, her expression wary. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, setting her sketchbook aside. "You're up early. More questions?" "Always, mademoiselle," he said, settling beside her on a flat rock. "But today, I wish to speak of you. You are a woman of courage, challenging Mrs. Boynton as few dared. Tell me, what did you see in Raymond that made you defy her?" Sarah's cheeks flushed, but her gaze was steady. "He's kind, Monsieur Poirot. Trapped, yes, but kind. He deserves a life free of her. They all do. And you believe they are free now?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively light. She frowned. "You think one of them killed her, don't you?" "I can't believe it. Raymond wouldn't do something like that. Neither would Nadine or Carol. Ginevra, maybe. She's so unpredictable." But even then, Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Mademoiselle Ginevra is a puzzle. Nan, her theatrics, her passion, they draw the eye. But sometimes, the loudest performance hides the quietest truth. Tell me, have you spoken to her since the death?" Sarah hesitated. "Not much. She's been distant. Keeps reciting poetry, like she's in her own world. Yesterday, I saw her near the cave, just standing there, staring at the spot where Mrs. Boynton died. It was unsettling." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "And you, mademoiselle, you were near the cave as well, searching for your journal page, were you not?" Sarah's eyes flashed. "Are you accusing me now, Poirot?" "I told you, I found that page by chance. I didn't even know what it was until Dr. Gerard explained it." "Accuse Nan." "Nan," Poirot said, raising a hand, "I merely observe. The page, the vial, the letter, these are threads in a tapestry. And you, mademoiselle, are part of it, whether you wish to be or not." Sarah stood, her voice sharp. "I'm not a killer, Poirot. I wanted to help Raymond, not hurt anyone. If you're looking for someone with a motive, look at Lady Westholm. She despised Mrs. Boynton, called her a tyrant to her face, and she's got that air of entitlement, like she could do anything and get away with it." Poirot's mustache twitched. "An interesting observation. Merci, mademoiselle. You have given me much to consider." As Sarah walked away, Poirot's mind turned to Lady Westholm. The parliamentarian's arrogance was a shield, but shields could hide as much as they protected. He recalled her sharp words at dinner, her dismissive tone when questioned about Mrs. Boynton's death, and there was something else, a fleeting glance she had exchanged with Dr. Gerard, a look that held more than professional courtesy. Poirot filed it away, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The desert's whisper that afternoon. Poirot gathered the group for an impromptu meeting near the sick, the narrow canyon leading to Petra's heart. The towering cliffs loomed overhead, their red stone glowing in the midday sun. The group sat in a semicircle, their faces a mixture of curiosity and unease. Poirot stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his voice carrying over the rustle of the wind. "Mes amis," he began, "we are in a place of ancient secrets, where the stones themselves seem to whisper. And yet, the greatest secret lies among us. Mrs. Boynton was murdered, and the killer sits here now, listening to my words." A gasp rippled through the group. Ginevra clutched Carol's arm, her eyes wide. Lady Westholme scoffed, but her posture stiffened. Dr. Gerard leaned forward, his gaze intense. Poirot continued, his voice steady. "I have learned much. A vial of digitoxin, a torn page, a letter of threats. These are not accidents. They point to a mind that planned, that calculated. But the heart, it betrays. It leaves traces, glances, hesitations, words unspoken. I ask you now, who among you wishes to speak, to unburden the soul before the truth is revealed?" Silence fell, heavy and oppressive. Then Ginevra stood, her voice trembling but clear. "You're wrong, Monsieur Poirot. You think you see everything, but you don't. She was a monster, yes, but none of us would." She broke off, tears streaming down her face, and fled toward the tents. Carol rose to follow, but Poirot raised a hand. "Let her go, mademoiselle. Sometimes the heart must break before it speaks." Lady Westholme stood, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is absurd, Poirot. You're stirring up drama for no reason. If you have evidence, produce it. Otherwise, leave us in peace." Poirot's eyes met hers, and for a moment the air seemed to crackle. "Evidence, madame, it is coming. The little grey cells, they do not rest, and soon they will reveal all." As the group dispersed, Poirot caught Dr. Gerard's eye. The psychiatrist nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of their shared pursuit. Poirot felt a surge of satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place, the web tightening. The letter, the vial, the page, they all pointed to a truth that was both simple and profound. But one question remained. Why? Why had the killer acted, and what had driven them to such a desperate act? The profile of a killer that evening. Poirot sat alone in his tent, his notebook open before him. He had sketched a psychological profile of the killer, a composite of traits and motives drawn from his observations. The killer was precise, methodical, with access to medical knowledge or resources. They were driven by a deep-seated resentment, perhaps a personal grievance against Mrs. Boynton that went beyond the family's struggles. The letter suggested a motive tied to control, but there was something else, a vendetta, perhaps, or a secret buried in the past. He thought of Lady Westholme, her imperious demeanor masking a calculating mind. Her disdain for Mrs. Boynton had been palpable, but was it enough to kill? Dr. Gerard, with his expertise in psychology and medicine, was another possibility, though his cooperation suggested innocence. And then there was Ginevra, whose theatrical outbursts could be a performance to hide guilt or a genuine cry for freedom. Poirot closed his notebook, his mind alight with possibilities. The killer was close. He could feel it. The letter had been the key, unlocking a motive that tied the clues together. Tomorrow, he would stage his final act, a confrontation that would force the truth into the open. He leaned back, his eyes gleaming. "In the lamplight, the heart of betrayal," he murmured. "It beats loudly, even in silence." As he extinguished the lamp and prepared for bed, Poirot felt a quiet confidence. The puzzle was nearly complete, the truth within reach. Tomorrow, among Petra's ancient stones, he would unmask the killer and bring justice to the desert.